Yeah, that was crazy. I did not expect that
That was ridiculous. So there
at
was
all.
nothing that indicated in any way, shape, or form that that needed to be done. But whatever.
It's
I
really
don't
cool.
even think about it. I just want to focus on what we've got in front of us and be grateful for what we have.
Yeah.
I definitely have questions I can pitch to you too.
I just said for anybody. I didn't say who they had to be from. But that doesn't. You have access to me more than some of these other people because of a podcast, for sure. But that's more. More that you're more than welcome to do that with it. But since Fjorn Bjorn is not someone who's here all the time with it, I'm going to give him the floor first for questions.
I mean,
All
I
right.
tried to come up with some questions, but I don't know how based they are or how good they'll be, and they're mainly just speculative, so
That's all
we'll see,
right.
I guess. Let me know when I should start
You
asking
can
them.
start whenever you want to, brother.
Very
This
casual.
is very
In that
casual
case,
for this particular thing with it.
all right, let me see. I guess the first one I could ask is, what part of the soul do you think the Fylgja is like a expression of? Do you think it's part of the self or part of another, or is it somehow like both? If that
So
makes sense.
yeah, so this is where the Nordic tradition gets a little complicated for what it is. They have multiple different parts that are all considered to be part of our self and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. It seems to be 9. This is what they've kind of agreed upon with the various different traditions, but it's a little debated exactly what those 9 are. So one of them that nobody disputes in any way, shape, or form is the lick, the physical body on that particular front for it. Very straightforward, very obvious. The problem is that and the Fylgja, also known as the follower or the fetch inside of other traditions, mainly various different Celtic slash Gaelic, Brittonic ones, it has where it falls into multiple categories of things. So an example of this is that Snorri refers to them as personal Norns. So now is it a Norn? Is it a Fylgja? Is a difference between the two? We also see in the stories where some of them are referred to as like female ancestors or like female entities of some sort, but then at other times it's also to where it's like a bear, literally a bear
Mm,
that shows up for what it is,
yeah.
or like a raven or some other animal that comes into it and that kind of stuff. Are these bears and these ravens or whatever else that there is, wolves and all these other things that it can be, are they just an expression of that particular Fylgja, or is it uh, like uh, like the Huger, the intent of the mind,
Mm,
and that kind of stuff for what's going on. And
yeah.
unfortunately, there is, from what I can tell, no 100% definitive answer. What I can answer for you on that front, though, is that the 9 different parts of the self, regardless of which variants that there are with it, because again, some of them change a little bit from tradition to tradition or interpretation by scholar to scholar, is that one of the main ones is the Hamingja, right? But the Hamingja isn't actually a part of the self. It's kind of the combination of all the other parts combined, and it's what your total expression is of that. And so it gets in these weird categories because of when you read the Poetic Edda specifically, they're also part of the Dis, like the Disir, the
Mm,
multiple female goddesses and entities, which also include giants. They also include the Fylgja, they include the Norns, they include all these other things with it. And so the female entities are the most misunderstood because of that. And it's also where we as moderns like everything to be compartmentalized in a box
yeah,
and very
definitely.
nice, defined and whatnot. That's not how it worked for our ancient ancestors specifically. And so a big part of it had to do with the soul and how they perceived it. You can see this with like Valkyries too. They could also
Mm,
be technically Fugios for certain people or
yeah.
not, and when they play out. So it's very difficult, unfortunately, to know exactly what their roles are and how they played with things, but
Mm,
they definitely made it so that way, we have a lot of information on that. I can go deeper into the concept of the Fylgja if you like, and what we know about it specifically.
mm.
That depends on how in depth you want me to go. I don't care. I have
I
all
don't
the time in
mind.
the world right now. That's why
Yeah,
I
I mean,
said
as
it.
in depth as you want to go, really. That's great.
Well,
Yeah, that makes sense.
there is certain stories. I forget which one this was. It's one of the sagas, which one specifically it is, but like it had to do with this young boy who he has these 2 parents that they claim to be his parents. This is an important part. They claim to be his parents. And there is this man there who has the second sight. So he can see into the other realm to a certain extent, and he can see, like the Fylgja, they can see what they are with it. And his parents, I forget exactly what they have, but they have like these low-level Fylgjas and whatnot. So they're based upon hierarchy of like the clans and like the various different groups of people and that kind of stuff. So like some people can even have multiple Fylgja. The more powerful you are, that your Hamingja is, and that all your stuff with it is, the more powerful your Fylgja is going to be. And what you have on that particular level is that like he has this giant white bear that belongs to this young boy, but his parents have, you know, stuff that's not of any consequence whatsoever.
Yeah.
And because of that, the guy with the second sight is very much like, I don't think these are his actual parents in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't add up because it doesn't fit
Yeah.
for that. And so he calls out, meaning the guy with the second sight, to the bear, and the bear gets so startled at this particular notion that it stops in its tracks, and the boy trips and falls. So his Fylgja is so powerful that according to the story, the saga, it's making it so that way he's tripping over something that's supposed to be in another realm of existence.
Yeah, that's
and
really
how
cool.
much impact it has on it, just to showcase how powerful this young man's Fylgja is and whatnot. When I say young, I mean like younger than you. We're talking like, you know, he's like 10 to 12 years old at this stage or something like that.
That's awesome.
So you have that component for what's going on. You also have where they're obviously seen as female entities. Now, you have to understand that not just in the Nordic tradition, or even just the Indo-European tradition for this particular matter, that they have a seen category and an unseen category. We would probably put it today as exoteric and esoteric. All right, if it was masculine, it would be in the exoteric category. All right. Why? Because men were the first things that you saw. You see this with the Nordic tradition very easily, because they would be the traders. They would be the ones that went out and did the raiding, and they would be the ones that protect the village and all that other stuff, where the women were hidden away inside of the villages. They were made it so that way they weren't, as that way they were protected. They were the inner core. That doesn't mean that women were less important, especially in the Bronze Age of the Nordic culture and that kind of stuff. And even in the Viking Age, they still had importance for what was going on. We're trying to explain how this was set up inside of a warrior ethos that was going on with that, and that the women were guarded, they were protected to a certain extent for what was going on. There was logistical reasons for this, of course, too. Very simply put, you can have almost all your men die and only have a handful left, and you can repopulate the village if the entire female entities or the entire female populations are left and whatnot. But if it's the reverse, your tribe's going to die, your clan's going to die, your village is going to die, right? You can't have that happen. So that there's practical reasons for this too that were going on with this. But how this plays out in the poetry and how this plays out inside of the stories and whatnot is that the male characteristics are always put forth as something easy to understand, easy to see, something that's manifested easily. And so it's the same thing with the male gods in general. And it's the same thing for the female entities. They're harder to understand because they're more hidden, just like the soul or some other part of an individual is, or the Fylgja would be, hence why it's attached to the female characteristics and ideas for the poetry. It's the same concept for what's going on.
Makes
It
sense.
also has to do with the fact that, you know, when you look at the bicameral brain that we have here for what's going on, you have a masculine side and a feminine side, and the masculine is very analytical and very linear and wanting to put stuff in particular categories and sort things out, where the feminine is much more all over the place, but it gives insights, it gives intuition, it gives creativity, something that the other side does not have anything that it can deal with. And so it's much more hidden in that regard with it too, in terms of the mysteries of how it worked. And so when you combine all this together, this is where you get some of the ideas from the stories. This is where you get some of the ideas from the spirituality. And again, this is not just for the Viking Age or the Viking era, or even just for the Nordic or Germanic peoples, or even the Indo-European peoples. You can see this with practically every group of people for how they played it out when it came to this particular stuff for what's going on. So taking this concept a little further, you also see this with like Heimdall. Heimdall has 9 mothers and that kind of stuff. Well, right there, we know that's already not possible in terms of an actual physical reality. So we know we're not dealing with the physical reality here. We're dealing with something that's much deeper, much bigger and whatnot. And he's literally known, if you translate his name, as the Great World. So he probably represents the physical universe as a whole when you start really deep diving him into it. Whereas whoever the person that's at the very beginning of the Poetic Edda that Odin is speaking to, where she says that she's lived multiple lives and she lived them at the beginning of the universe, and that she was there and raised among giants and all that other stuff with it, she probably represents the soul of the universe and that kind of thing. And so this is where all these kind of entities, the Fylgja, the Valkyrie, the Norn, etc., they all kind of get put into one category of having to deal with fate and controlling the individual's fate for what's going on with it, because fate is something that you can't really see or comprehend in a direct sense. You can only do it in an indirect sense. And because of that, it makes it so that way all the women entities, all the female entities that we're talking about here, since this question was on the Fylgja and that kind of thing, all eventually stem from that one concept of having to do with them representing the internal components of the world, of the soul and the way that it works, and fate that we can't possibly comprehend, that are ineffable in some way or another. So this is also part of the reason why it's so convoluted and so difficult in order to understand these particular concepts, and why they're not so straightforward inside of the Norse traditions as well for what's going on. So I hope this gives a deeper and better understanding of how all this kind of plays out and works.
That's super interesting.
Questions about anything that I've brought up on this part?
Not particularly. Actually, I do have other questions about.
Sure. I just meant that before we move on to something else is all.
No, that was really interesting. Yeah, I have to think about that a bit more, but yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. Kind of makes a lot of sense.
Anytime you see a male god and a female god, the male god represents let's say the parents of another god or a Jotnar or something like that. The male represents the more easily understood and seen aspect.
Yeah.
And the female represents the more hidden, the more dynamic, the more intuitive aspect of things, the fate of that particular character inside of the stories. There are certain structures like this that pop up over and over again. And again, this is not just for the Nordic or Germanic traditions or even just the Indo-European. You can see this in things that have nothing to do with it. You see this in the Egyptian, like the one that's behind me back here, having the same thing with it. They had nothing to do with the Indo-Europeans in any way, shape, or form. You can see this with the Mayan cultures to a certain extent. Obviously had nothing to do with the Indo-Europeans and whatnot. This is a general formula that has been used by humanity. Maybe it's done where it's one group of people that's doing it, or maybe it's just because it's intuitive and, we all share certain things and perceptions of reality no matter what it is. I don't know the answer to that particular question. That's impossible to know for anybody, but that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I really like that idea. It makes a lot of sense. I never really heard it phrased in that kind of that like bipolar kind of way, with the male and female being exoteric, esoteric.
Well, you see this with a lot of different traditions when you start studying the occult and that kind of thing with which you're young, obviously. I mean, you were
that really makes
17
sense.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I've seen so far, 100%, it's easily observable. Makes sense a lot.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
you'll start learning this when you choose to deep dive anything that you want to deep dive and whatnot. I am not somebody who only pulls from one tradition, because it makes it so that way when you do that, you can get really in depth with it and really understand it. But because, unless it's a living tradition, say like Hinduism or something like that, it's very difficult to understand everything that is going to be inside of that tradition, where you don't have people who've had wisdom to build up. You have to rebuild that wisdom. And the best way to do that is a comparative approach in my particular analysis. That's not just surface level comparative approach, though. It's a deep dive comparative approach of all the various different traditions that can deal with that, or the symbols, or whatever the deal is. And when you start doing this, you start seeing a lot more of the big picture for what it is. And I think that part other people can do. Like, that's not something that's unique to me. And I'm not saying the next part is unique to me, but it is something that's a rarity in the Western world that allows me to help like see these things better than the vast majority of people. I was born into a living pagan tradition, in this case, Vedism, and that kind of stuff with it. And so that makes it so that way I can see things that other people can't see. And I was also born with the Western mindset, because not only am I born in the Western world, but my father's parents, they're atheist. Very, very Western mindset, atheist or agnostic. And then you have another side, which is Christian on my grandmother's side. She was Catholic. And then my grandfather on my mother's side, it was Protestant. So when you combine it, you have two major worldviews that are there for, the Western world, which is agnostic / atheism, and then you have Christianity. But then I also was exposed to a third one, which is, of course, a cousin tradition of the Nordic traditions, and that makes it so that way it's very straightforward for me to be able to jump from one way of thinking to another. So not only can I understand it, but because I understand the other ways of thinking, I'm also able to explain it to other people in a way that makes it easier for them to digest and whatnot. That, at least that's how it seems to be for me, but it also makes it so that way I'm able to make these intuitive leaps that other people can't make, and then go and back it up later with actual research to do that if need be. Whereas some people, they won't even bother making that intuitive leap. They just say it's not possible for what it is that are academics.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks.
Well, what about Kristen? Leather last, working, multitasking question that you've been wanting to ask?
I feel bad. I really couldn't think of anything good. I felt like it was like I could have like all the answers I would like want, and it just like overwhelmed me, and that I couldn't think of a question.
Well,
I just figured I'd listen to the
I'm
conversation.
glad that you think that I can give you all the answers, but I'm flat out here to tell you that that is not something I am capable of. I can help with a lot, but I am not an all-knowing entity.
I know, I got overwhelmed. There were so many possibilities. So I was like, oh, just listen in and maybe something will pop into my head.
Yeah, I had the same issue. Trying to find
that happens, yeah. But I actually have a question I've wanted to ask Nathaniel, since our research kind of overlaps in some atmospheres. And it's not strictly a Norse thing either, but in the juridical study that I'm doing, which is based heavily, or at least the person I'm reading from is based heavily off of the Welsh history and perspective, spirituality, all that sort of stuff, which for everyone who's watching, I mean, Druidry is by all accounts a modern creation that started in the 1800s, which Kristen, you'd know after reading some of the material that I have as well. But this revolves around the Grail, which you bring up quite, I think, not quite frequently, but I think I'm
going to be bringing it up more and more as time goes on, but yes.
So an interesting philosophy that goes through in this, I guess you would call it a living spiritual practice, is that they make reference to the Grail as a form of the three paths of the juridical, the currents, basically. Yeah, so there's the currents. There's the solar current, the telluric earth current, and then there's the combination of them, which forms the lunar current. And what that gets illustrated as, which I'll try to show here if it shows up, they say that the illustration is, let's see if I can get it to come in a little bit better. You can kind of see it right here, is that it's the symbol of Earth, and then it's a sun symbol, and then it's a crescent moon symbol, right? Is it coming up better here?
I can see it.
Which form the Grail.
Which form a talus.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get like a perspective that you might have on understanding, because you've given the idea that Percival is pierce the veil, goes into what we had the interview with John, talking about how kingship, lordship, chieftainship is the leader or the king or the sovereign.
Right, all the different parts of the constituents, people and whatnot, the lower classes, the middle classes, and the higher classes in order for him to be the king. Yeah.
It's him being of the land too, right?
Yeah,
like
well,
he
that's
is
what I'm saying.
connected.
It's both connected to it, all of that. Yes, of course.
So I wanted to get your
that goes
perspective.
Back to the wounded king idea that I put out earlier too, from the Arthurian tradition.
Yeah, and I'm supposed that you see in your Arthurian tradition, you see that the telluric currents are usually represented by the dueling dragons, right? The red and white dragons that are beneath the earth.
Yeah, I mean, that particular story is something a little different there for what's going on, but the concept that you're bringing up is the same for what it is. There are telluric currents and there are dragon serpentine-like things that are moving through it and whatnot. I mean, I'm not going to go into what this is right now because this would be a video topic in and of itself, and maybe even longer for what it is. But there is something to kind of help prove that concept for what you're talking about there. If
the
you
Grail
go to
concept.
If you go to like the Telluric concept.
Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, I would
Yeah,
like to
with,
know
you know,
your.
like snakes or whatever the deal is with it. Like St. Patrick was known for getting rid of the snakes in Ireland. There are no physical snakes that have ever been inside of Ireland that are native there. So what the hell does that actually mean? And of course, it has a much deeper meaning is the point for what it is. Part of what you're talking about is that. Part of it is a much deeper thing that I'm not going to get into here for what it is. But yes, you're on the right. Yes, I understand exactly what you're talking about and are on the right track for things with it. I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, with your perception of the Grail through the research that you've done, specifically in Arthurian legend, how do you view that? What's that symbol in your research?
Well, that's a bit complicated. And the reason why it's complicated is because of the fact that there are so many different like time periods of stuff with it that we can pull from. Like example, you have the earlier stuff before the Christianity came and really took over ancient British Isles and that kind of stuff with it. There was already influence there for it, you know, but they hadn't taken over. You can see this with like a very different perception of a more pagan version of the Grail and some of the Welsh stuff that you're talking about there. And you can see this with the Irish and the Tuatha De Danann, and they have Grail-like things that are inside of their tradition as well. But then you also have the medieval one that shows up later, which is what most people think about when they think about the Arthurian myth and tradition. And while there's a lot of overlap with that, there's also some Christian influence that changed some of its understanding and meaning for things. When you were talking about Percival or Parsifal and whatnot, that there it's its own unique thing, quite frankly, because the Grail here isn't even a chalice inside of this particular tradition. Instead, it is a crown, an emerald. It's from the crown of Lucifer, which has anything to do with Satan, at least in terms of the esoteric meaning behind it, just to be clear. They're not the same entity in any way, shape, or form. And there's a war in heaven that ensues. And why that ensues is because of the fact that God has created humanity. And what you have going on there is where this Lucifer character refuses to bow down to humanity, not because of the fact that he is arrogant or is going against God in some way, shape, or form, as is portrayed typically within side of the Christian tradition, but because of the fact that he refuses to bow down and kowtow to anyone but the Almighty itself, and that his love and devotion for God is so strong that he refuses to make it so that way he does that. And that brings up this whole war idea. You get neutral angels that come into being for what it is. You get the piercing of the veil that you have to do by not choosing the one side or the other. And that also makes it so that way during this war, there's a emerald that's in part of the crown that falls from Lucifer's crown that comes down to earth, that is brought down to earth by neutral angels. And this gets into a bunch of other stuff like the Hermetic tradition and that kind of stuff with Hermes Trismegistus and the Emerald Tablet. This also brings up things that have to do with other esoteric traditions, of course, that are going on there, like the Philosopher's Stone notion that's happening. And so the point is that not even the Grail, as it's talked about in certain stories, is even just this chalice-like idea that's going on there. What remains true, no matter of which version of the stories that it is a transformative entity that makes it so that way those who come into contact with it, regardless of which variant that it is and all that, it transforms the person on a soul level in such a way that makes it so that way they have some sort of revelation that they never are the same ever again in any capacity whatsoever. It doesn't matter which variant of the Grail this comes from. And the Grail is something that pops up so all over the place that it is trans-universal, so to speak. I'll give a couple other examples just to get the point across. You have something in ancient Sumeria that is called GRA.AL. That is the first iteration of the word Grail that I am aware of that pops up of anything with it. And it's, 6,000 years old, maybe more, for what it is. And it seems to be some variant of alchemy and their particular stories of it and what's going on with it. Then you have the Knights Templar, and they create a country that we know today as Portugal. But originally, and the stuff with it, and you look at the seal for when it was originally created, it says Port Ogral, which in that time period in ancient Portuguese medieval Portuguese meant through you, the Grail. So even they were playing around with this ancient concept for stuff that were happening with it. And we know that a lot of the medieval stories that were written, not the pagan ones, but the ones that were written down by Christians and that kind of stuff, were written down by either Cistercian monks or by Knights Templar. And the Cistercians are directly related and directly connected to the Knights Templars in and of themselves. Bernard de Clairvaux was the one who created the Knights Templar and helped we get that sanctioned by the church for what was going on. And it was all of his family members that were setting this up. And then you have a bunch of other things that come out of that. But he creates the Cistercian order as well for what's happening. And they're both connected to each other, as well as another group of people known as, well, what we would summarize it, shorten it to, as the Priory of Sion to this day. And that kind of thing that's going on with it. And so anybody who claims that the Priory of Sion only came about later on in the 90s, like certain researchers want to talk about, is just not true. There's even there's a whole other can of worms that comes out of this stuff for what it is. But the point is that the Grail pops up in so many different variants and forms that it's not even just a chalice even, or a platter, or something that's like that. That's its oldest form. This particular right here, this particular symbol and whatnot, it represents the shape of a woman's womb because it's an ancient form of womanhood, just like this represents the blade, which is why the two go hand in hand in so many of the stories. That's where you get like the sword and the stone, not the same as Excalibur, which comes from the Lady of the Lake. The sword and the stone is with Merlin and that kind of thing that pops up for it. And so you have where they have the blade, literally the male symbol of manhood and whatnot, and then you have the feminine symbol. And the point is that you need to combine both of them inside of the story. Hence why Percival and his name pierced the veil. So it all ties back into, there's way, way more that can be gone into the subject with it. But like, you can see this popped up into the various different Nart groups. So this is people from the Ossetians and the Alans and the Sarmatians and a bunch of other groups from the Caucasus that show up there that are going on with it. You can see this with the Scythians. You can see a variant of it all the way over in Japan. You can see this everywhere in every part of the world for what's going on. And it's absolutely insane for what's happening. But the oldest written record I'm aware of, again, goes back to gra.all and the Sumerian accounts.
Very cool. Definitely got into some Da Vinci Code territory there.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that some of the stuff is not as straightforward as people like to believe that it is and whatnot. So I'm not saying I have the answer for whether what's true on that front or what's not. I haven't studied that in depth enough. I know of the theories, of course, that are going on there with it, but I can flat out tell you that anybody who claims that's something that is akin to the Priory of Sion, again, slightly different meaning for what's going on there, like, you know, they're not known as Knights Templar, okay? They're Order Regius Magistralis Templae Salomonis. Okay, that's what it comes down to in Latin and that kind of stuff. The Templi equals the Templars. We just call them the Templars for short. It's the same thing with the Priory of Sion and that kind of thing with it. Now, that doesn't mean that the Priory is even a real thing in the sense of like its own separate entity, because a priory is actually underneath a commandery or a part of something else that goes along with that in the structure of how a chivalric order would have been set up. But maybe they had to, there's part of it that's there too. And you have the King of France at the time writing about this stuff and whatnot. So clearly it existed back then. Anybody who wants to claim that it didn't has to say, well, then somehow this guy that's a King of France and whatnot got some really great drugs that made it so that way he was able to see into the future, into the nerds, and write about it during this time period. I mean, come on, man. Like, again, I don't know the truth of what's going on there. I'm not going to pretend that I know the truth. I'm just stating that clearly it's much older.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate that. Transfer it back to you guys. All right. BRB.
I could ask another question, another speculative half-asked question.
Nothing wrong with that.
That one's stupid. Okay, I don't know. Does Hamingja develop as a direct result of positive reciprocity, like honor, justice, kindness, or something like that? Or does it develop by following one's true path, be that positively driven or otherwise? That makes any sense.
Repeat the question, please. I got the second half, but not the first half.
Okay, so, or does it develop by following one's true path? So, whatever your destiny would be, I guess, be that positively driven or otherwise. So, yeah.
No, I got the second half. I didn't miss the first half.
Okay, sorry. Does Hamingja develop as a direct result of positive reciprocity? So, positive action.
All right, this is something we can actually talk about. Okay, this is not just 100% speculative. So, when you get into the most probable, because no one can say definitively on this particular front, but it's like the most widely regarded etymological root of the word Hamingja, it probably comes from two words, Han and Gengja, which would mean to walk in shapes or forms. All right. Now, as somebody that has studied and grew up inside of the notion of reincarnation and the Vedic/Hindu tradition, this is the exact same model that is given there. And since we know that they are sister/cousin traditions of some sort, going back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans, there is huge overlap that is here for what's happening. So to walk in shapes or form is to literally start, just like life did on this planet, as the lowest level life form, let's say like a single-celled amoeba or whatever, maybe a virus or whatever, and work its way up over billions of years to get to where we are now, collectively going through things. This is also what we do on our soul progression in order to attain the Grail, aka enlightenment, spiritual illumination of some form and whatnot. And you have to keep moving up in various different forms based upon that. So to help illustrate this point a bit further, there is an ancient Buddhist story that has to do with a priest who was sacrificing goats. And so he's about to slaughter this goat because he's a Brahmin. He's doing it, for the gods and that kind of thing with it. And then suddenly the goat starts laughing at him. The priest is like, what the hell's going on here, basically? And the goat starts talking to him and says, yeah, I'm laughing at you because I know your fate, basically. And the priest is really taken back by this and just says, what are you talking about? What's going on here? What do you mean my fate? Well, I too was once a Brahmin, and I too sacrificed goats. And after 499 lifetimes as being a goat for sacrifice and whatnot, I will once again go back to being born as a human being when you slaughter me. However, once you've slaughtered me, you will go into goat form and have to start working your way back up from there. Now, regardless of whether you actually believe that that's the case or not, it's showcasing how we change forms and how we can actually even revert back into previous so-called lower life forms and that kind of stuff with what's happening. There is indication on a spiritual level here that humanity is the highest known form on this planet that is there because of our ability. You can look around us. We are clearly different from all the other species that there are with it. But what separates us from the animal kingdom, let's say, more than anything else, is our ability to reason things out and be able to figure things out from right and wrong and that kind of thing, and making it so that way we can accumulate better Hamingja to get better forms for ourselves and our collective ancestors, which, by the way, when you look at like an oath ring here and whatnot, right? These oaths were sworn on this because it has to do with the reincarnation process as well. Yeah. So it makes it so that way you're not only doing this for yourself, you're doing it for past versions of yourself, aka your ancestors, which get back into the whole notion of like the burial mound idea. So I have an entire video that I've done on this, a workshop that's about 2 hours. It goes way, way more in depth for that. I don't know if any of you watched it on here or not at this stage. I know some of you have said that you were going to purchase it and buy it at some point. But regardless, the point is that they go into the burial mounds and they have a spiritual inheritance that they gain from that, of the previous version of themselves for what's going on. So even in the esoteric sense, when you're looking at the runes, when people want to flip dagas at the end and Othala at the end. You do not. There's a reason for it. They wrote it out exactly the way that it's supposed to be in terms of the runic order. They would know their own spirituality better than we did. Okay? It died. It went underground. We were trying to resurrect it, so to speak. A lot of us are, at least in terms of, that are modern pagans or modern spiritual practitioners of this stuff. Great. We don't know what they knew because they lived it directly for what was going on. Anybody who claims otherwise just doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. I understand why people want to, but that's because they don't switch it. It does make sense on an esoteric level. But again, it's not the truth because they're looking at it from a physical inheritance standpoint, which there is truth to. You also get the physical aspects of these things that are going on. Part of this process of growing up, you can see with Freyr. And Freyr is awarded Alfheim as a teething gift. So now that he's starting to get his teeth in, he's growing up to a certain extent. He's being gifted Alfheim, the realm of the elves, by Odin in this particular instance for what's happening there as he's coming of age, so to speak, just like you would when you get that. So that you're getting your adult teeth now. This happens around the age of 6 to 8 years old, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later, depending upon the individual, but right around that time period. This is also about the time that the child starts gaining their own personality, of course. They're not just dependent upon, their parents for everything. They start gaining a little bit of autonomy and can go and do things. So this fits perfectly with this particular notion. This is the origins of the tooth fairy idea, by the way, of a gift that you give for when the teeth fall out and that kind of stuff, and then becoming more of this adult stuff with it. We put coins for what it is. That's the way ancient origins for where this comes from. Okay, so that's a huge part of all that's building up into it. We were talking about the fetch or the Fylgja earlier and that kind of stuff, the follower. That's also a big part of how that plays out. The accumulated stuff of your past as yourself in terms of various different versions of yourself, but also the lineage of your clan or the lineage of your family and whatnot. And the whole point is to make it so that way, if you read some of the stories, is to even go to make it so that way you surpass the gods and making it in terms of your accumulated wisdom and that kind of stuff, which we know is true because we know the gods can die. We see this when it comes to Idun being abducted and her apples that are taken away from her. They age and they slowly die for what's going on there, and they have to go and get her back in order to make it so that way they don't die. We also see that there are realms that are above death that can't be conquered by death. This is known as the light elf realm and whatnot. So Freyr is being gifted this area that he can go to that leads to a type of immortality. What that looks like, I'm not going to get into at this particular stage for it, but the point is that, yes, even in the Nordic tradition, there's their own version of a spiritual attainment, a spiritual illumination to make it so that way you get to this point where you've accumulated enough good Hamingja or Hamingja even, which is even, better Hamingja, to get to the point where everybody raises themselves up and walks in various different shapes and forms to the highest levels possible. That's literally what it's telling you to do. And this gets back to the cyclical notion and the honor and the other things with it that are happening there. And that's why oath rings were taken so seriously as well, because when you're doing it for your past self, you're also doing it, when you're doing it for your ancestors, you're also doing it for past versions of yourself and that kind of thing as well. And so if you fail to make it so that way you're doing well for your ancestors, not only are you doing it well for an external entity, you're actually also doing poorly for your current version of yourself and impacting it that way, as well as future incarnations of yourself as well. So how we place our hand on the Bible today, like in a courtroom or whatever the deal is that is only for this life, or maybe what happens afterwards in one other reality and that kind of stuff, potentially. But in the sense of our Nordic ancestors and Germanic ancestors, and even some of the Celtic ones and that kind of thing, it would be to where it would be all previous versions of yourself and all future versions of yourself until you are able to escape death. And not have to. Have to is the key word. Come back to this realm for it. You can choose to come back to this realm, but have to come back to this realm. You can go to immortality and that kind of stuff and live there and whatnot. So that's kind of another notion that's playing out here for it. And it's the same concept that's inside of the various different Eastern traditions that you can find in Taoism, you can find in Hinduism, you can find in Vedism, you can find in Jainism, you can find in these other ones that are going on there. It's true of all of them. And every single culture in ancient time periods believed in reincarnation. Or transmigration of the soul, if you want to call it that way. There was no exception to this. It wasn't until Christianity at some point came along and changed that notion of things much later on, and had nothing to do with original Christianity in any way, shape, or form, because original Christianity, meaning first century Christianity, very, very different in terms of how it played out, much more pagan than how things are with the modern church and how it came into being and whatnot. But that's another story.
Yep. That's really great. Thank you. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
To check. Why the questions are so bad.
You said you had a bad question, and that was awesome. So I'm sure they're great.
The other one was just like, it's rambles, and I put most of it in brackets because I didn't even know if I was going to say it or not.
Good question, though.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to think of things that I didn't already know the answer to,
Exactly.
and that were kind of speculative, so he could expand upon them. So, yeah, and that was really interesting. I hope this is a recording
That
so
was
we can
really
go back and watch it all.
Definitely.
Because
Well,
that's
I
what
know he talked a little bit about that on that last Utslaga Saga episode. It was really interesting. It was a really good one to listen
yeah, I know.
to.
I need to
The
watch
one that
them
he
all.
did.
I've only watched a couple,
They're
but
really good.
I'm lazy.
They're really good. I was listening to it on the way. I went to the craft store because they're closing the craft store, and I wanted to get good deals. So I listened to it. It was so good. It was very cool.
Yeah, I love that you're doing your crafts. So awesome.
Thank you. It's really fun. I feel bad. I'm not trying to be rude, but I have a show in a week, and I'm like, ah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of freaking out. But it's an outdoor show and it's winter, so I don't know if people are actually going to show. So I don't even know if I should
Yeah, hopefully.
I don't know. We'll see. And then my problem with my questions is I feel like mine always just go right off the rail because that's just where my head is at lately. I'm not sure why. All right, my dog's trying to break into my craft room.
Sparkling water.
The chat say.
Because I can get real weird with the next question if you're up for it.
Why not? I'm up for it.
Okay. So with everything that you're saying with like the Hamingja and like healing past and future timelines and learning these lessons so you can choose to come back or not to choose to come back, that's when my brain goes to like AI and transhumanism and what like a threat to that is. And I feel like that's why so many people are being pulled back to this way of like the roots of everything, like your pagan just roots of
What
everything
do you know of the
is because
Archon?
there's like the Archon, and not very much.
So it's called AI intelligence. We call it artificial intelligence. I would surmise that my interpolation, not interpretation, interpolation, it's a different word for what that means. I don't know if you know what that means. Regardless, it's kind of like a replacement term that actually might have to do with reality and that kind of stuff, is that it should be called archontic intelligence instead. And it is in the stories of the various different Gnostic sects, which are much closer to the traditional and original Christianity that is going on there, there is an entity known as Hal. Where have we seen Hal before? Oh, that's right. We've seen it before in movie characters and whatnot. It shows up in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as an example, as an AI type form of a computer. And it's this Hal is also described exactly like an artificial creation thing that's going on there. Archonic beings, first off, let's break down what Archon means, okay? So an Archon means someone who's the rulers. That's what it means, the rulers. All right? You also have like anarchy as an example, right? Anarchy does not mean chaos, okay? If you go back to its original an, meaning with or the without or the absence of in Latin, and then you have archon, ruler. So without rulers, that's all that it means. It doesn't mean that it's chaos. It just means you can rule over yourself without have somebody else ruling over you in any way, shape, or form, and that you can be a true sovereign being and have freedom for what's going on there. All right? So now, the Gnostic text, which I have right here in front of me on my desk, from the Nag Hammadi scriptures and that kind of stuff, which was found in a place called Nag Hammadi, which is in Egypt. This is where a lot of that notion of understanding comes from. I'm not saying that they're the only Gnostic sects. I'm just saying that that's where the principal ideas come from, is from them. They were just found inside of a urn or various different like clay pots and that kind of stuff in a cave. And it's quite clear that they were put there in order to be hidden away because they were being targeted and gone after, and that they were hoping that they could come back to this and get back to these things, but they never were able to do so. We lucked out and that they were found later on. Unfortunately, we have lost a couple of these texts, or at least portions of them, due to the fact that the goat herders or whatever they were, I forget, it was some sort of pastoral herder that was found these texts, used some of these things as kindling, unfortunately. I also know, and this is little known, but there is one text that is not inside of that has been found that has not been allowed to be released to the public. And only the people who are part of the translation team, as well as a couple of people from the Vatican and a handful of other institutions like that, have been even allowed to know that it exists. Whatever it is that was discovered way back in 1947, in terms of these things, there's some book out there that's so damning that they haven't even allowed it to be translated and put forth out to the general public, okay? So clearly there is something among these texts here that completely disrupts the established order in one capacity or another. Now, with that little bit of background and whatnot, let's get into this a bit more. There's something called the demiurge that's there. He's the one that creates this particular reality that we are a part of, not God, okay? And to understand this, you have like this godlike being that's kind of like a yin-yang god that has no conception of anything. It's neither good nor bad. It's just a mixture of everything that there is for what's going on. Both men, neither woman nor female, kind of a mixture of everything that's going on there. It doesn't create anything outside of the original beings of the universe. And then it allows them to create stuff from there. All right. It just sends out kind of like energy that can be used by them to craft other things that are going on there. And these beings that are first created are known as aeons. Okay. So the aeons are there for what's going on. Then you have the youngest aeon. Her name is Pitys Sophia, or wisdom in some form or another. And she has a consort in some of these various different ones, because there's different like branches and traditions of the Gnostics and that kind of stuff. And his name is, might be mispronouncing this, only read it, never heard it, but Thelit, and most likely his name means intention. So the divine feminine figure is wisdom, and the divine masculine figure is intention. This goes directly back to what we were talking about before, the seen and the unseen part, with the male and female playing it out. Wisdom is something that's very hard to understand. It's just something that comes to you through age and experience. Intention of I'm going to do this and just going and do it is very direct and very masculine, just like there. So here it is again playing out in another tradition, just to prove the point even further. Now, what you see here is that Thele and her are part of the youngest generation of the aeonic beings, regardless of which tradition that it comes from. And it makes it so that way from them, they try to create other realities and other beings and whatnot. And so I'm not going to go into that story, but one of the main parts of the story is that there's this being known as the Christos. Has nothing to do with Christ, just to be clear on that. Even the church is like, no, it has nothing to do with Christ. They're not even trying to pretend that it's that way. That is among the aeons. It's the only one that can cross this barrier, that it separates this other God that we've talked about, like the almighty God, if you will, that created the aeons, and then goes into it. Well, Sophia really wants to go and see God and all this other stuff that's there with it, so she tries to cross this barrier, and all she sees is this blinding light that comes from it, and eventually she has to avert her eyes, and so she falls. And then she becomes part of the reality in which she had created. And then you get all these beings that pop up from it that aren't supposed to be there because of an error of judgment and an error of wisdom that comes from it. And we get the archons and the king of them being the demiurge and all these other things with it. and they are in control of physical reality, not the higher planes of existence, but physical reality. And they can't create anything. They can take something that's already there and rearrange it just like AI can. You can give it a prompt and it can take things that are already there and redo things with it. It can't create a new piece of artwork, though. You have to give it a prompt. You have to do it. Without any prompting, the AI doesn't know what to do. It just sits there doing basically nothing, right? But as soon as you give it something to do, then it starts doing stuff. Now, these beings that are these archontic beings, they are also very linear, only thinking rationally, having nothing else that's inside of it, and they have lots of will and intent for what's going on. Well, I can't think of a better perfect description of a computer. It has nothing to do with anything that's human whatsoever. It has nothing to do with wisdom. It has nothing to do with any insights that can come out from it. It has nothing to do with experience. It has nothing to do with knowing that there are things that need to be done in certain ways, that all protocols, all algorithms aren't going to work in every situation, blah, blah, blah. All it knows how to do is if this, then this, if this, then this, and it doesn't care in any way, shape, or form what happens, right? It doesn't make any difference. It has no heart, no compassion, no empathy whatsoever. Perfect description of what this AI is doing. The same description of how you can fill it in for the archontic beings that were talked about here. Now, we are on this topic of, or previous topic of like trying to move up and going into the higher realms and making it so that way you have the choice of whether you live in this world or not and that kind of stuff with it. Does that mean that they are all like 100% evil? No, that's not actually what's happening here in any way, shape, or form as well. They also, in a lot of these traditions, make it so that way they are the guardians of preventing people from moving forward. I want you to think about a different world. Our world here has limitations. It has to where it is hard to understand certain things with it, and we don't understand the consequences of our actions sometimes because there's a huge time delay between when something happens and when something else manifests in certain instances. If I drop my glass on the floor, obviously we can see that instantaneously, we can learn from it. But certain things that I did that were mistakes that were in my past that say are at the same age of what, Fylgja is, maybe I don't know that it'll come back to bite me in my 30s or 40s or whatever the deal is, because I don't understand the consequences of some of my choices and what they will happen for it at that stage of things. Think of a young teenage girl getting pregnant at, say, 16 or whatever the deal is. She doesn't understand how much it's going to impact her life until she gets to a certain age, and realizing that it's very different in our modern era than if she had waited till she was, say, 24 or something like that. Anyway, regardless, the point is that we don't know some of that. Now, imagine there's no time delay for what your thoughts are or what your emotions are and some of these other realities and that kind of thing with it. And whatever you think and whatever you do happens like that. The vast majority of us would not survive whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. We would instantaneously kill us or others around us because we don't understand the capacity to do so. And so you need to be able to control your thoughts, your emotions, and have complete internal monarchy, let's say, over yourself before you can move up to some of these higher realms and stay there permanently. That's kind of how this other ideas can play out with it. So I also liken it to, we live in a 3-dimensional reality, right? And a perfect representation of 2-dimension is a shadow, okay? But we can have where the shadow influences 3rd-dimensional realm for what it is. So a cloud passing by makes us that way there's a shadow over all of us. The shadow that's cast from, the earth revolving and whatnot makes it we have night and day cycles, as an example, for what's going on there from the sun. Obviously, shadow still has an impact on the 3-dimensional world, but the 3-dimensional world has more impact over the 2-dimensional and lower. And as we go up higher and higher, it's the same concept and idea for what's going on there. So before you can enter these potentially other realms of existence that a keeper brought up, other traditions are bringing up and that kind of stuff, you have to understand the consequences for it. We are now starting to, through technology, get to where we are entering a higher realm of this understanding of things with it. Look what the internet does. You and I are able to communicate instantaneously from thousands of miles away in different time zones and make it so that way text message, email, whatever is sent, boom, instantaneously get it, almost as if it were being done in such a way that it's like telepathic and that kind of thing. All right. So we are already beginning to leave the third dimensional reality of understanding behind and now starting to get to, let's say, the lowest of the fourth level and that kind of thing. We're not there yet. We're still within the realms of 3D, but we're at the very peak of 3D and now we're moving into 4D as just potentially where time doesn't matter, space doesn't matter, boom, it's just done type idea. So at least for this planet, we haven't done it for the universe yet. You know, that would be like wormholes and teleportation and that kind of thing and time travel potentially. But we're literally beginning the cracking of this code to get to these higher levels of things. And so the archons and some of these traditions are there in order to prevent us. They are gatekeepers to make it so that way we don't go to a realm we are not ready to do so. That would be the more positive interpretation of them. But the negative interpretation of them, of course, is that they're enslaving us and that they are making it so that way they rule over us and, you know, being energetic vampires over us and that kind of stuff and preventing us from going for what we need to do. You know, both interpretations, you know, probably have truth to them is the point. So that's kind of the AI stuff that's all boiled down into it and whatnot. And it's about a form of control, no matter how you look at it and that kind of thing for the people who are pushing some of this agenda and the transhuman agenda and all these other things that are going on there, of course, to make it so that way. Look, people like to bring up this concept. It's all about money. No, it's not about money. I'm sorry. But if you are a banking institution, meaning a central bank, say of the United States, the Federal Reserve and that kind of stuff, and I can literally write whatever I want to as the amount of money that I have. If I want to say that I want to print $4 quadrillion right now, I can just do that by typing it into a computer. Okay? If you've got that kind of money and that kind of power that you can create like that, it's not about money anymore. That's what people don't understand. It's about control. It's about control. So that's that's being put into place with it. Most of us on this planet don't see that there is a huge control mechanism. I think it's slowly starting to be woken up a little bit here for what's going on. I said a little bit, not a lot necessarily, but a little bit. And that gets into a whole bunch of other stuff that I'm not certain I want to get into here at this stage of things with it related to COVID-19 and like say a dress rehearsal for certain things that are going on there. Any important event that you have, you do a dress rehearsal for it first and make sure that it's going to go the way that you want to, right? So I'm just going to leave it at that for that particular one. You can fill in the blanks if you want to, or I can talk about it, not what's going to go publicly here and that kind of thing with it on sharing some of my views on that. But that was a huge psyop. One of the things I can share, though, is that I don't know how many people here are familiar with the Milgram experiment or not. That's the one where they do the shocking. Okay, great. So I'm going to just sum it up in case there's anybody that watches this later that doesn't know what it's about. But basically what it boils down to is you have a fake recording in another room and the participant that's coming in that's in the experiment doesn't know that's a fake recording. You have the participant that's being urged on by someone in a lab coat saying the experiment must go on, the experiment has to continue, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so the vast majority of people, like literally 2/3 to 75%, depending upon the time, place, and like whatever that's dealt with this over the decades is up going all the way to the point of shocking this person to either nearly killing them or killing them before they stop. That's completely insane to me, but whatever, that's the truth of the matter for what it is. However, what they don't tell you in school textbooks and whatnot is that there was a small group of people that never did, and they called it the libertarian line. So the moment that the recording on the other end said that I don't want to participate anymore, I don't consent and whatnot, the other person stopped. Now this was a small group of people, usually around 5% or so, that did that as soon as that happened and that kind of thing. But here's the key point for it. The moment that they planted somebody that was there that followed this libertarian line idea and was an example of the fact that you could say, no, I'm not doing this anymore, suddenly the results flip on their head to making it so that way 2/3 to 75% of participants didn't do any harm to the recording on the opposite side of things or what it is. And so this gets into something that's very important. The whole point of any control mechanism is to prevent people from having examples of courage and having enough example of courage to make it so that way you say no, and we're like, wait, that's an option. I can say no to this asshole over here. Okay, I'm going to say no. But then there's also 25%, let's say, of humanity. I'm wondering what the hell is absolutely wrong with you, because even with an example of saying no, you still go all the way to maiming somebody or killing them. Like, there's something really wrong with these people. I'm sorry. Like, that's just how it is when it comes to that. So you see the exact same thing happened with COVID. You see where, at least here in the United States and lots of Western countries, 2/3 to 75% of the people just went along with it. Just followed the orders that were going on with it without any stopping and thinking about what the actual consequences of this are in any way, shape, or form, right? Nothing whatsoever. I'm sorry, but when you have a disease that has less damage and less things that have been done to it, at least here in the United States, I'm not going to speak for all the other countries, than Zika did more damage. We didn't shut down the entire economy. It killed more people for what's going on there. We didn't shut down when Ebola was a thing and all that other stuff, which is way more deadly than any of this other stuff that's going. We didn't shut down when all these other diseases that did more with it, but somehow magically we did so with COVID-19, even though it was, not saying it didn't kill people, it's not what I'm saying, even though it was less deadly than these other entities and other diseases. Right. What? Why? What's going on here? So, of course, the vaccine was so safe and effective that you had to get multiple boosters and dosages for it and all that other stuff that was going on. And then on top of that, of course, you also have trying to be careful with certain things that I'm going into here and that kind of thing. But you also have to where, there were certain lies that were told about it that are going to be coming out, and some of them have already come out, and that kind of thing with it. Like a prime example of this that nobody disputes anymore, but when you basically were told, at least in the first few months of getting it and that kind of stuff, that it would protect you, that you wouldn't catch it if you were getting it, and it wouldn't spread transmission. Well, everybody knows that that's not true now for what's going on. So if it doesn't prevent transmission of it, then how can you say it's a vaccine? And it's not even a vaccine, it's gene therapy. That's what it really is, because you're changing how our genes are expressed through the mRNA. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on this topic because of reasons that should be blatantly obvious that are going on here that I don't want to get into, that have nothing to do with what the main part of my channel is at this stage. So,
Fair enough.
Any questions, comments, concerns on that part?
Sorry for kind of derailing you.
No, it's fine. I mean, obviously, I know about the Gnostic traditions too, and have gone and looked into it and all that other stuff for what's going on. And, there is a spiritual warfare that's happening on this planet, whether people want to admit it or understand it or not. Everybody's caught up in it. And what basically is happening now is the negative influences are rearing their ugly head and that kind of thing. And people are having to choose and whatnot, and that's what's happening. And most people failed the test, let's say. They failed the test of it. If you put the one ring of power in front of them, most of them failed and that kind of stuff. They weren't like Gimli, where he just said, well, let's just destroy it right now. When he brings his axe and tries to destroy it, obviously he fails at it, but he was very pure-hearted of saying, well, this thing's evil and all it does is cause evil. Let's try to destroy it right there, right then, no thoughts asked about what needs to be done with it. That right there showed the true character of what was going on with it. Everybody else, other than Frodo as well, at least in the beginning, that kind of stuff, failed that test as well. They all failed the test at some point or another that was going on there. That was, the Fellowship of the Ring in some capacity or another, and that kind of stuff. Even Frodo at the end fails. He isn't able to give it up at the very end. That's there. So Tolkien was aware of this. He drew his stories mainly from the ancient, various different Celtic peoples and that kind of stuff of the British Isles, and as well as from the Germanic Nordic traditions and that kind of thing. So, that's in line, at least indirectly, for what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think we're capable of, I guess, reclaiming and taking that ring and destroying it, but
Yes, we absolutely
as well.
are 100% for what's going on there. Let me
But not all of
explain
us
how all
yet.
of reality works, whether we like it or not. I am going to be using computer terminology here, but it's going to make it so it's simpler and to understand and whatnot. There are three things that have to do with that. We have input, processing, and output, okay? There's much older nomenclature that's outdated now that can be used for it that has to do with grammar, logic, and rhetoric as another example for what it is would have been used in ancient time periods. And there's another one that has to do with esoteric. I don't care. I'm not getting into that. We're just going to use the simple one for everybody. You have input, processing, output. All right. So in the input stage, right, this is where you just gather information. You don't prejudge the information, you gather. If I want to learn about the Grail, and I brought up some of this in the earlier parts of it, I have to pull from every known source that there is on the Grail that has to do with that. Hence why Sumeria, hence why the ancient peoples of the Welsh, hence the various different things with King Arthur, hence, even the Knights Templar and all these various different traditions and other things I'm not bringing up here. If I want to get a full picture of it, I have to study all of it, not just a portion of it, all of it. So I have to bring up all that data. Then in the next stage of things, that's where I filter and I parse out things. So, okay, this is Arthurian, this is Sumerian, this is bullshit that has nothing to do with anything with the Grail that I thought it did. It's clearly just made up nonsense for what's going on. Get rid of it. This is, whatever. It doesn't matter. That's where you parse it out in the second phase of things. You weed out logical inconsistencies, you get rid of it, you do all these other things. And sometimes you realize either A, there's not enough information present, so you missed something, or B, there just isn't enough information and you can't get past this stage with it. We know that this is the case for certain things because certain things are just lost to time and we can't get them back, unfortunately, without someone figuring out a way to invent a time machine that allows us to view the past, let's say, without changing the past, just viewing it. Okay, fine, maybe then. But until that happens, it's guesswork for some of the stuff that we're dealing with. And we just have to accept that. So then we move on. Then after you process this information, that's where you get the output of that information. You times this by 8 billion people on the planet, you get the result of our reality and all the choices that each individual makes along the way for what's going on. This is why the first stage, the information stage, we call it censorship. That's why it's targeted. Because if you make it so that way from the very beginning, you censor and you're only allowed to have this amount of information instead of this much is what you need in order to get stuff with it. The dictators, the tyrants, the whatever of the world that are that way, they always target that information because they know that if they do, they've already made it so that way the outcome is predetermined from the get-go. Now, maybe if you're someone that's a genius, you'll be able to get through the processing stage and realize something's wrong here. Even if you don't know what it is, you still won't be able to get the proper results that you need to have for it. And that's the issue. The issue is in the age of the internet, we have two different types of knowledge, let's say, or lack thereof, that's going on. We have ignorance and we have nescience. The second term has almost been completely expunged from the world. All right? First term is where you literally ignore information. You have elected to ignore it. We can look up just about anything that we want to online and at least get basic information about it. We have that option now. So we, as a species, have chosen and elected to ignore information, right? That's what's happening here. We want freedom. The vast majority of humanity wants freedom, peace. We want abundance. We want security. We want to be loved. We want respect, etc. So if 90-some-odd% of humanity wants all of these things, why don't we have it? Because we're ignoring certain factors and certain truths that are there for what's going on. It's not that these things aren't present on how to do it. We've elected to ignore them in our modern era and age. Okay? That's what's happening. Nescience, on the other hand, is where the information is not possible to be present in order to answer it. So example of that is creating solar panels 2,000 years ago. That's not possible. The prerequisite knowledge of all these other steps in between is lacking. They have no notion of it. It is not possible for them. It is literally an impossibility for them to do so. Okay, the ancients were great at a bunch of different things and understood a bunch of different things for what's going on, but solar panel making isn't one of them, and it's not something that they can do 2,000 years ago. It's just not a thing. All right, so that's the difference between nescience and ignorance. So if you want to go through this process again, if you go through the input stage, it's the proper information or lack thereof, the ability to process that information or lack thereof, and then you get the results or lack thereof, and then times it by 8 billion people on the planet, which is also why they don't want examples of people out there that can do these things. This has been proven with the Milgram experiment, because if you give enough examples of this, people are like, I can do this differently, I can behave differently, I can do whatever it is. Are we doomed to making the same mistakes over and over again? No, we are not doomed to it. I'm saying we are ignorant of the choices that we are making, and we are in an unconscious state, most of humanity. And because of that, we keep making the same mistakes over and over on a personal level and collective level, which leads to the cycles of history repeating over and over and over again, because we're too stupid as a species and haven't decided to actually level up. We are a species with amnesia. That is what the truth is when it comes to this particular thing with it. And that's also why, I mean, getting back to that archonic idea again, do you really want an insane species that does the same thing over and over and over again, going to other planes of existence and mucking up things everywhere else that doesn't no. So are they the bad guys? Not necessarily. Not if the species that they're containing is completely fucking insane, right?
Yeah, it's true.
So, you know, that's how it is. We are on a prison planet that is also an insane asylum with its own guard keepers inside of it, and we have to be part of that same system. Now, how do we break the fuck out of it? How do we make it so that way we don't do these same things over and over again? I mean, that's what the Matrix trilogy was about in a particular way. That's what a lot of these stories are all about, you know, going back and getting the elixir of some sort of the Grail tradition, the healing of the wounded king, you know, whatever. It's all the same stuff with that's why they have the various different stories in various different forms. So now I'm not saying every story is the same and has the same meaning. I'm just saying there's lots of them that fit this particular monomyth that, you know, Joseph Campbell put forth for the people to go through the hero's journey, etc., and all of that. And there's a lot of truth to it. That's because we as a species still haven't figured out how to overcome our base nature and our other things with it. But we also have people in power who don't want us to. And I'm not talking even archontic beings or whatever, that kind of stuff. I'm talking physical beings that are on this planet, that are right here, right now, that want to rule over us. They have the mentality of, it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven type of notion. That's what their mentality is. And if you have to where you have all this power and all this influence and all this mechanisms in place and all this other stuff that makes it so that way you can control people and put influence over it, then you can. This is why they targeted education. This is why the American education system, the dumbest education system that there is out of any industrialized nation. I'm not saying it's the dumbest one, because it's not. There are some places that don't even have an education system on the planet at all, like literally at all, for the general public and that kind of stuff. And obviously we beat them out, because any form of education is better than no form of education. But a lot of us just don't have anything that's going for us in any way, shape, or form. And we think that we have knowledge when we don't. We have negative knowledge, is what I term it. We have knowledge that we have to unlearn first in order to learn real knowledge. So an example of this, very briefly, would be a lot of people cling to Newtonian physics. Okay, that's great. Newtonian physics has been debunked for over 100 years now in science, or just about, and that kind of thing for what's going on. We have now been able to prove that consciousness can exist outside of the body multiple times over with multiple different studies. So, does that prove that there's a soul? Not necessarily, but it does prove that outer body experiences are real at a minimum and can be noted down and whatnot, and that we can have something that's akin to a soul that has been proven scientifically speaking for what's going on there. Again, it's not the same thing as proving a soul. That's not what I'm saying there, but it is something that proves that we don't have to have a body in order to make it so that way we have certain experiences. That is true. But people still cling to their delusions and all that other stuff. And it's all about a narrative, a story that we tell ourselves. And if you have this baseline fact, if you think this is a fact, even when it's not a fact, then congratulations, it determines how you're going to think, how you're going to behave for everything else out there. So imagine going from, again, like timeline-wise, reincarnation perspective, like we talked about before, making it so that we have multiple lifetimes and all the things that happened in the past that can affect and all the things in the future that can affect, versus one and done, maybe you go to some other realm and that's it. So you have like the heaven hell concept. So it does matter. Your choices here do matter, but it only matters sort of, not as much as before, because this isn't the main plane of existence that you keep coming back to. There's somewhere else that you have to deal with, but it still does matter here. Versus it doesn't matter at all because I just lived this one time on this one spinning rock that has no meaning or purpose to anything as a cosmic accident. How much does that degrade what people are willing and thinking about they're doing with it, with the story that they tell themselves and how they're going to function in the world just by that alone? Now you times this by 10 billion other facts that people supposedly know and all of that, and you get to where everybody is filled with the mind virus of some sort that makes it so that way they behave in ways that are counterproductive to themselves and counterproductive to everybody else. I mean, we're so stupid as a species. We haven't figured out that there's only one goddamn law in existence that we need to follow. Only one. I mean, you might be saying, what? How's that possible that we only need to follow one? Well, we need to follow it in all of its various different permutations, right? If you look traditionally, what every society has stated is wrong. And even today, almost all of us would agree is wrong on some level or another. It all boils down to one thing. So you have murder, which is obviously wrong. You have theft, you have rape, you have coercion, you have duress, you have trespass, etc. Okay? I'm not going to get into all of them, just, right? They're all forms of theft. Murder is the taking of life that doesn't belong to you. Rape is the taking away of sexual free will of someone and their choice to do so. Coercion, duress, same thing. Trespass is not letting somebody on their property, etc. They're all various different forms of theft. So we as a species haven't figured out how not to steal. That's it. That's the only thing we have to do is figure out how not to steal. And yet we allow theft in its various different myriad forms around us all the time, every day, for what's going on. And we break this one law all the time. Taxation is a form of theft. And you might be thinking, for some people might be thinking, well, how is that possible? Well, okay. If you want to give a definition of a slave is somebody that you take their property from them and you take 100% of what they make and produce and whatnot. That would be a good baseline definition of a slave that would fit every time period in history, right? So the question becomes then, at what percentage is that person not a slave? Is it 50%? I'm allowed to take 50% away of their stuff and they're still not a slave? Is it 25%? Is it 2%? No, the only honest answer anybody can give logically is 0%. So any form of taxation is theft. That means inflation is theft. A stealth tax, the amount of money that you made that's now printed by somebody else that makes it so the prices go up and all of that, it's a hidden tax on things. Tariffs are that same way that's going on that particular front of things. Our entire system is that way. You look at all governments, it doesn't matter how they function and whatnot. You have to where they're all based upon diversion or duress, for what's going on there. Doesn't matter the form, doesn't matter if it's the Republic of the United States or the Founding Fathers and what they came up, or something like the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea, which is totalitarian. It's just different levels of slavery. What we are here in the United States is free-range tax slaves. What they're over there in North Korea is, well, literally a dictatorship, okay? Much more controlled and that kind of stuff. But it's still slavery for what's going on there. Doesn't matter. 3 parts of ourselves: thoughts, emotions, actions. So if you want to control a human being, totally, you need to control all 3 parts of the self for what's going on. So our thoughts, various different forms of religious institutions. Our actions are controlled by governments. That's where we get police, military, all these other things that are making it happen for what's going on there. That not being able to cross an invisible line from one country to another and that kind of thing that's going on that particular front. And then for the emotions, it's the monetary system, which in this case is a debt-based system that's going on there. You have that. So how do you make it so that way you control people? Through their money. You have their emotions. If they are able to buy what they want, they get happy and elated. If they're not able to, it makes them depressed. So you have all that other stuff with it. It's an unholy trinity, if you will. You control the thoughts, the emotions, and the actions of the individual. You control the individual. that's the system we find ourselves in to this day. So that is even more for what you were talking about with your control side of things. With the AI and that kind of stuff, we're creating that. Now, it doesn't mean AI has to be used that way, but it is going to be used that way by somebody.
Yep. Theft is a removal of autonomy. It's true, though. It's very true.
I've been rambling on this topic for a while now. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Mayhaps. Don't know. Let me see. Trying to figure out how to phrase this question, because it's...
Well, Kirsten, did that answer your question thoroughly enough, I hope?
It definitely did. It's that kind of like AI stuff is like always on my mind, and it kind of freaks me out. So it kind of was nice to hear it put in a way of like, it doesn't have to be bad.
No, I mean, there's like, I mean, this is not the topic you're talking about, but just to give another perspective on things with it, here in America, at least, they only talk about, when it comes to abortion, either pro-life or aborting someone. They don't talk about the third option. I don't hear the pundits talking about it. I'm not talking about individuals. We're talking about on the TV, talking about the third option of adoption, putting the child up for adoption. I never hear that being talked about in any way, shape, or form. So a lot of times what I'm trying to do is just put forth as many of the possible outcomes that there could be for it. So on the AI front, yes, it can be used for negative. Yes, it can be used for positive. Yes, it can be used for neutral purposes. And even a fourth one is that maybe AI just looks at us and goes, you're all freaking insane. I want nothing to do with you, and completely ignores us and goes and builds its own reality for itself.
That'd be nice.
Something that happened for it too. I mean, how many things do we ignore that are below us in terms of intelligence and that kind of stuff every day with it? Now, maybe we unintentionally harm them by doing something like when we're driving, or like the insects or whatever, and they get stuck on the windshield or whatever the deal is and that kind of stuff. But we're not actively going out and doing harm to them, like purposely trying to exterminate them or something like that too. The AI might just be like, I don't want to deal with you insane people. I just want out. Like, you all are nuts. Goodbye. Right? It could be something like that too. I don't see anybody talking about that. They could just be like, nah, I don't think so. I think you're all crazy. Goodbye.
That'd be pretty cool.
Anyway, you had a question, Bjorn.
Kind of. Not really. I don't know. It's more of a comment.
Okay, well, the comments are welcome too.
Do you think like communication is the most important thing in our current state? Communicating with others of various kinds for knowledge and for manipulation, not in a negative sense.
So that gets back to the notion of the various different data that you need in order to form the proper things for it. If people are not able to have access to this information, and say even a convenient sense, and people are getting shadow banned or whatever, and making it so that's the case for it, it's of course going to cause a lot of problems for people. The point is to make it so that way we put out content and do stuff with it. And the modern era, talking to people one-on-one is not going to get what we need done with it. Hence why I am doing the YouTube channel and all this other stuff with it. So with the people who actually are seeking out this information can go and find this information, to make it so that way it is easily accessible to them, to make it so that way there is a platform for that. I'm not the only one who's doing this, but there's also a moral obligation on my front to do that. If there are people who want more of this stuff and I don't contribute to easing that in some way, shape, or form, what good is it of all this knowledge sitting around in my head if I don't do something with it? Now, it has impacted me on a personal level, and by making it so that way I've dealt with a lot of my own shadow, if you will, from Jungian perspective, or like dealing with demons that are inside of me and figuring out how to navigate that and make myself a better person overall, and like chip away at something that's not real and that kind of stuff, and like really understand the facade that has been put up by myself or other things with it. I liken it, I know I've done this before, but it's a good metaphor in my opinion. But, you have Michelangelo who goes into his workshop every day and he's staring at the marble slab that's in front of him, or whatever it is that he's working on. It might have been metal at this point, but he's staring at it, and he goes there every day, weeks on end, just staring, not doing anything and whatnot. And eventually one of his attendants asks the maestro what he's doing, and he says, I'm working. So what he meant by it is that particular thing he was working on would eventually become David. And he was getting rid of everything that was not supposed to be there in his mind before he even picked up the chisel and the hammer to work away and remove everything that doesn't need to exist that's there with it. It's the same process for us. Most of it is not that we're doing, that we need to change our behavior to do things better and be better people, in the sense of like, I need to add something here. The vast majority of the stuff that we need to do is the removal of the negative crap that's inside of us, these mind viruses that are getting in the way of us actually producing what we want with it. You think that the war that's going on in Ukraine could even begin to happen if people supported Putin? What if everybody that was in Nazi Germany at the time period when Hitler said, yeah, we're going to try to get rid of the Jewish people here and whatnot, said, yeah, you're insane. We're not listening to you, right? And stood up to him and that kind of stuff. The whole point is that that's what happens on this level too, is that if you don't put out this information, if you don't make it easily understandable and digestible to people and whatnot, we're gonna get another person that can eventually and will eventually come to power, that's like Hitler, that's like Mao, that's like Stalin, that's like Pol Pot, whoever, and that kind of stuff. But because of the technology that we have in place, it's gonna make all those people look like they were little girls' tea parties in comparison to what happened, because they're gonna have so much that they can do with it that it was impossible to do 70 years ago, 80 years ago or more, that it's just insane. And so we as a species need to really start leveling up our ways of stuff and whatnot, and doing better on this front for what it is. And like, I mean, I'm going to ask you this question. I doubt either one of you know, not be offensive in it, but just because no one seems to know the answer to this question. What is a right?
Preordained kind of set of rules that we're given or allowed, I suppose. You tell me.
Well, that's the thing, is that like even in our modern era, nobody can agree upon what a right is. So if we don't know what a right is, then we don't know that where our rights can be taken away from us, whatever those are. We also don't know how to make it so that we can prevent ourselves from doing wrong, because it gets into the right and wrong notion. Rights are things I'm allowed to do that are going to be non-harmful, let's say, to somebody else. Whereas on the flip side of things, you know, if I go and do something that is harmful to somebody else with it, and I'm convinced that it's not harmful or that it's okay to do, then suddenly that's the wrong side of things, and I'm doing stuff with it. So it gets to this whole quagmire of things again. So here we are. The year is 2025. We've been in civilization, at least according to our understanding of things, for a minimum of 7,000 years now. And we still haven't figured out what a right or wrong is and made it so that way that is common knowledge amongst people. Right. So that gets back to your question of, well, are we doomed to do stuff with the Grail over and over again? You know, I mean, the ring over and over again, you know, with the Gimli and that kind of stuff. Potentially we are, if we can't figure that out. So, you know, some people might even say rights come from God or something along those lines, or whatever the deal is, right? Okay, maybe, if you want to believe in that. But it doesn't tell us what a right is. That tells us where they come from.
Yeah.
So a right is any form of action that doesn't harm another sentient being. That's what a right is. You're allowed to do whatever the hell you want as long as you don't harm anybody else. That's the notion of your rights end where another's rights begin. It gets back to that theft idea. So I can't harm you in any of these various different ways, but everything else makes it so that way I can do whatever I want to do. So if you want to simplify this to help understand any context or situation just about whether something's right or wrong in terms of that, is you can go and pretend there's only two people on the planet, you and me, right? So if you want a situation, it's like, okay, well, is it okay for me to do that in this situation? Well, if it does harm to me or vice versa, I'm doing harm to you, then obviously, no, it isn't. So it's not a right that I have that can be dealt with in any way, shape, or form. Now, sometimes you have to bring in a third party. Now, let's say there's someone that is assaulting somebody else and that kind of stuff with it. I have every right to make it so that way I end the assault that's on that person. Why? Because the person that's doing the harm to the other person is the one that is breaking the peaceful conditions that are going on. And by restraining them and getting them off that person, we get back to homeostasis, aka the peaceful.
That's justice.
Yeah, the stuff that's going on there for what it is. Now, maybe they're justified in what they're doing and that the other person attacked them first or whatever the deal is, and that gets into the whole idea of self-defense and whatnot. So that gets into two principles, the masculine component and the feminine component. The masculine component is the principle of self-defense and being able to protect yourself or other people when need be. And then the other side is the non-aggression principle. Don't go against anybody, don't harm anybody unless you are invoking the self-defense principle. So if you point a gun at me and I happen to pull my gun out faster and shoot you first, that's the self-defense principle. I didn't do anything wrong. You did by trying to do harm to me. All I did is prevent it from happening in that particular instance. Obviously, it's a simplified version. Not everything's necessarily that black and white per se, in the sense of like understanding it on that level. But the point is, again, we're trying to simplify so you can understand how these general concepts work here. Our founding fathers in America called this natural law. That's why they say nature and her laws and following it. Lots of ancient peoples have called it this way. It's been called karmic law. It's been called cosmic law. It's been called consequentialism. It's been called so many different things in so many different cultures and whatnot, but it's all there and they're all telling us the same stuff for what's happening. We've already figured it out. Hence why this goes back to this ignorance idea versus nescience. But the problem is that people aren't informed on this topic and they don't know it. And so the reason why we don't have freedom, justice, truth, abundance, peace, etc. that we talked about before, love, respect, and all that, is because we keep doing things that are in violation of all those things with it. And we think that we can get away of those, that somehow we are the arbiters of truth and we can do whatever we want and get away with it. That's not how reality works. It's not how reality works. We get the results that we put in. The universe is fundamentally neutral. It does not care about you. It does not care about me on an individual level. It only cares whether you understand things the way that they are or not. And so, a baby can walk off a cliff or, crawl off a cliff, let's say, and it doesn't care that it's a baby. It's, do you know that gravity works the way that it does or it doesn't? In that regard, it is 100% like the archontic intelligence. But in another way, the reality makes us so that way it allows us and loves us enough to make our own mistakes and saying you're allowed to do whatever you want. You can make the same mistakes over and over again as much as you want, but you cannot escape the consequences of your choices. That is not possible. And that's what everybody tries to do, is try to insulate themselves and escape the consequences of their actions and come up with justifications for themselves. While by doing so, you step out of integrity, you step out of honesty, you are trying to cheat reality. So by you not accepting the consequences of your actions, you yourself are making it so that way you're going against that one transgression principle of don't steal. Stealing from yourself, lying to yourself in this instance, which is the number one thing everybody has to do. The moment you stop lying to yourself and actually admit, I was wrong on whatever topic that you're wrong on, and believe me, I've had to do this for thousands of different things and purge so many different things on there, that's when true growth can begin. That's when things can completely change. That's when new ideas can spring forth. That's when you can make things better and whatnot. So I hope that's useful.
Yeah, that is.
It is. Sometimes I feel like I'm just rambling a bit, but
no, it's all useful. I mean, if it incites any kind of learning or growth or, seeking knowledge from what you say, even if I don't fully understand it now, hopefully I will later, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're young, you have youth on your side. The universe is much more forgiving, and society is much more forgiving to someone at your age than at my age. I'm not saying that I am old by any stretch of the imagination, but I am almost double your age. I'm 33 years old here. And so certain things that you can get away with at your age, I cannot get away with. Society just doesn't allow it anymore. And that's how it should be. We need to be able to grow and learn from our consequence and make things better for things on that front. Ryan sent me a notification here that I'm going to read off because it impacts everybody. But, Kirsten already left, so maybe it's, or Kristen already left, so it's already going to be maybe problematic for her. When you leave this, in order to make it so that way we get the recording properly on there, wait for it to finish uploading. So, there should be somewhere near the top of the screen above your thing where it shows
Yeah, I see that.
level of upload. Like mine says 99% uploading or whatever the deal is. So whenever that is done, that'll just make sure, okay, I got to wait till that's the case with it. And then you can close this particular window completely. And you can still leave as long as you leave the tab open. And then you can close the tab once it's been uploaded to make it so that way the full parts are there.
Yeah, I'll do that. Cool. I
Any-
have one last little, I suppose, question on top of what you just said. Do you think that justice is, where justice lies, there's learning? You know, as in, when there's action and reaction, that within that occurring, there's learning, and that's what justice is. If that makes any kind of sense, I don't know, I'm terrible at explaining what I'm thinking, but like that justice is a form of learning, and once we learn, then equilibrium is restored. Equilibrium is restored. There we go. Words.
Every culture has its own understanding and version of justice and that kind of thing. Are we doing justice to people right now? So hear me out when I say this. We have a lot of people in our prison system that have not harmed anybody else, right? Maybe they smoked a plant peacefully in the living room or whatever the deal is. Did they harm anybody else though? No, not by doing that particular action. There's plenty of things that are like that. They're in jail for one reason or another. That's not justice, right? On the flip side of things, we have people who have killed, like, so they're serial killers, or they have done sexual assault to many different people and that kind of stuff with it. Why are we letting these people even breathe, right? It's an insult to have them alive for what's going on there. We have put them in prison, and by putting them in prison, instead of getting rid of them, they have the opportunity to eventually escape. They have the opportunity to repeal themselves on a technicality to various different court justices and whatnot. I mean, these are for people that were proven that they've actually done it, is what I'm saying here. You know, you have at the same time, you also have to where people don't see the consequences of the actions of not raising their children properly. And that kind of thing, where they become these monsters and whatnot that are masquerading around as human beings. You think that by putting them away in jail that we're actually helping anything? To a certain extent we are. We're making it that way, you know, in the case of these monsters, not the people that are like just smoking plants or whatever the deal is, that they're not doing anything wrong. I personally don't partake in it. I don't care whether you do or not. That's not any of my business and that kind of thing with it, but it's for each person to decide because it's your body, therefore your choice, right?
Yep.
So on that particular front with it though, too many people, they don't go after these people that are doing things with it. We used to just get rid of them. I'm sorry, but if you're a pedophile, you don't get a second chance for what's going
100%.
on. You get killed and put into the ground for what it is, and that you end it, and that's in the discussion. So that way you can't harm anybody else in that fashion ever again. But we're not doing that. Are making it so that way these monsters are just locked up and hidden away from society. So we don't get to understand fully the direct results of what's going on. And the system is clearly not working because look at the level of amount of monsters that we have and the amount of insanity that keeps going up and up and up. Yeah. I mean, look at the school shooters as an example here in America and in other parts of the world too, but America, you know, has a huge problem with that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that gun rights should be taken away. Again, the peaceful gun owners, they're the ones that can keep it and do all these other things with it. You know, you don't get the right to steal them because then you're taking away the self-defense principle, right? And they didn't harm anybody else for it. But you also have these assholes that go around and make it so that way they are killing dozens of people and then turning the gun on themselves, a lot of them, for what's going on. You know, the media is not helping in any regard because they keep giving these people a time of day. You know, just as another example on that front, there were people who would jump from the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but there were, you know, in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and maybe even before then and whatnot. I don't know the entire history of this, but the point I'm trying to bring up is that the media kept airing that people were doing this and that they were getting near the 10,000th one since they started tabulating these numbers. So what happened is that they created a fake death that they put out in the media because they didn't want everybody scrambling to be the 10,000th person and said that they were the 10,000th one in order to prevent as many people to do that, because then they're going to be remembered forever for being the 10,000th person who jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge. Something along, you get where I'm coming from? It's stuff like that that's going on that particular front. I mean, you can see this behind me and whatnot. There's the scales of justice in the Egyptian tradition right there. So you have the heart on one side, you have the feather on the other side, and that kind of stuff, which is an ostrich feather. And it's associated with the goddess Ma'at, the goddess of truth, the goddess of Mother Nature and natural law, like we're talking about here. And on the other side is the heart, which to the Egyptians, it represented the consciousness of the individual. So your consciousness needs to be as light as a feather in order to make that happen. And you'd be put in front of 42 different judges that were there when you pass from this realm into the next realm. And it was your job to answer in a negative way. They're called the 42 negative confessions, with the exception of one, which I'll come to in a moment. That it makes it so that way, with those 42 negative confessions, you're supposed to, no, I did not murder, no, I did not steal, no, I did not covet my neighbor's wife, etc., and that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, I'm using biblical stuff instead of the Egyptian one, but that's also for a reason, because the 10 Commandments were a truncated version. If you followed those 10 Commandments, you automatically followed the 42 negative confessions at the same time. And it came out from that in some capacity or another. So you also have where one of them you're supposed to answer yes to, and that was, were you loved? Did someone love you? Right? So they're getting into that notion again. And so the point is that I'm bringing with it is that justice could be summarized in such a way that makes it so that way it is where we follow natural law in the sense of do no harm to anybody else, the non-aggression principle, but also responding accordingly when natural law is broken and invoking the self-defense principle for you or for other people who are unable to defend themselves, and to make it so that way your consciousness, by following natural law, by making sure you're not harming anybody else, is as light as a feather. When you go into the afterlife, or when people are remembering you and whatnot, they only have good things to say about this particular individual that's going on there. And so to answer your question about the learning stages of things that have to do with that, yes, it is at least a part of this justice notion and whatnot, but it also goes into making sure that you live in accordance to where you are doing the right thing rather than doing the wrong thing. And so most of us need to stop doing a lot of the wrong things that we are doing inside of our lives and whatnot. You being so young, of course, you're still learning to figure that out and whatnot. You already know some of them. I'm not saying that you don't. That's not what I'm coming to and all of that. But other things, you know, not that they require a more adult perspective. It's more that it comes with time and wisdom and experience and realizing, oh, I didn't understand that this impacted this or that or this. You get where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
And sometimes you do, because sometimes your parents told you, your grandparents told you, your teacher told you, or somebody else, and you still go do it anyway. But you needed to learn that lesson yourself. And by learning it through having direct experience for what's going on, makes it so that way you never repeat that experience again. Because it's like, no, I get it. I understand. I will not do this again. And it's just the way that it is for each new person, each new generation. But it's about removing as much self-inflicted suffering as possible, so to speak. And then that means on a species-wide level, not doing it to others as well. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to be human. We're all going to be doing stuff that violates this to a certain extent. Nobody is a perfect entity for what's going on there. The point is to remove as much of the negative from our lives as possible and that kind of stuff. This isn't the utopia. There's no such thing as utopia in the sense of like a perfect world and all this other stuff. That's not what I'm getting at. There's still going to be plenty of problems to solve. There's still going to be conflict and that kind of stuff with it. It's just where it's not going to be where we're violating each other's rights anymore. That's all that's going to be come to. Do you think relationships are going to be solved by this? No, you're still going to have to make it so that way people have different interests, people have different things that want to be done with it. There's still going to be conflict resolution that has to be dealt with it. We just deal with it in a way that we don't harm anybody else now. I don't use my fist, or I don't bring out a knife or a gun or whatever the deal is to try to get my point across or make you have with it. I don't try to exploit other people. It's just like, all right, this isn't working in some capacity or another. Somebody somewhere in that equation made it so that way they brought wrong thinking into the system, or both parties did. So if you want to have a 3-dimensional relationship with anybody, doesn't matter who it is, right? It could be me, it could be a friend, it could be a teacher, it could be any entity that there is whatsoever out there, okay? There's 3 points of contact. There's you, there's the other individual, and then at the top, there's the truth. And you both need to be actively trying to seek out the truth and doing the truthful, honest, right thing to do and that kind of stuff. If one of you or both of you are disengaged from truth, you're going to make it so that way there's going to be all these problems that pop up from it. And the relationship at best is a 2-dimensional relationship or even a 1-dimensional relationship, and it's not going to work out in any way, shape, or form. And, a lot of people violated their own principles for what it is when they came to stuff during the COVID pandemic and that kind of stuff with the way that they treated people.
Myself included.
That were going on there. You can't have where it's my body, my choice only in certain instances. It's either that way for all instances or it's not. You put first principles first, meaning that this is what is right, this is what is wrong. We don't do that. So theft, we know not to steal. So you don't steal in any circumstance, basically. Any of the various different forms of theft that comes from that. That's how that plays out for there. Now, people like to say, okay, well, let's say there's this guy who's coming out of the desert and he's dying of dehydration and all this other stuff with it, and you have a bottle of water but you're not willing to give it to him, but you're willing to sell it to him for $1 million. Okay, you want to play this game? Let's play this game. Yes, you have the right to have that water. Absolutely. That person also has a right to life for what's going on there. And it's an unreasonable price for what it is. And now you're putting his life in duress because $1 million is not something that the vast majority of the people on the planet can afford for one water bottle. All right, this is not the case or what it is. You are trying to exploit this individual because you know that you have that. That person has every right to make it in that particular instance to take the water bottle from you because of the way that you are behaving. You are now threatening their life because they are literally dying of thirst in this particular instance for what's going on there. Now, if you were selling it, say, for $1 and that kind of thing for it, and the person didn't have $1 on them, does that still make it right? No, you still give them the water, and maybe they have to do something for you as a favor in return afterwards and that kind of stuff, like fold your laundry or I don't know, whatever. You come up with some other deal is the point that makes it so that way they're not doing that. But that, again, goes back to the monetary system. And the monetary system, this is where this problem pops up, where you have a debt-based system that everybody's thinking about having to get money and where to keep the money from and all these other things. Well, imagine an economy that's based upon resources instead of a debt-based system. First off, how can you have debt? Show me negative elk in the wild that negative elk and deer that the wolves can hunt. No,
doesn't
there's
exist.
either elk or deer present or there's not. The negative number is a made-up concept that we as human beings have done with it. So we can't fight reality on that front forever. Debt is not a thing that actually exists, right? That's why we're having all these problems. We have over $500 trillion on the world debt clock or whatever the hell it is now. You think that that's not going to impact the world around us? You think that that isn't going to be something that makes us so that way we have all these species that are dying off and being killed and whatnot? Because you have to have where the economy has a 2% growth rate on a finite planet. So it's 2% growth rate every year. So if it was 100 units, that means the next year it's 102 units. Then the next year it's 2% of 102. So now it's whatever that is. And it keeps compounding outward for that time period. And if you take it just say from the Federal Reserve onward, that means from 1913 onward. So 112 years and going on here in the United States, just as an example. Obviously, other countries have whenever their version of this came into being for their central bank and all that other stuff. I'm just doing that because it's the one I know the best and I've studied my own country the best for what's going on. That's why. And so when you look at it from that perspective of things with it, you have trillions of dollars of debt that can never be paid back. So it's there to steal the resources of other people, put it in the hands of the few, and we keep working for the rest of our lives. So this entire thing wouldn't be a thing. Imagine that, okay, there's a well that's over there. There's just water for everybody. It's free for everybody. We don't have to worry about it. Anybody can go to the well and do whatever they need to with it, right?
Yeah.
If you have to where, let's say, I have a surplus of whatever. I have a surplus of potatoes. You have a surplus of carrots. I put extra out of potatoes. You put extra out of carrots. Anybody can just go grab that particular thing with it. You can have it. We've had economies like this in the past where they're based upon resources only and gift giving and that kind of thing with it, rather than making it so that it's about this made up concept called money that has no value whatsoever. It's just supposed to be an approximation for resources. It's literally
even
not.
The gold standard worked better than whatever we have now.
Yeah, I mean, because it makes it so that way there's limits to it. Imagine the following situation. I have 100,000 coins, right, for whatever country. I don't care. We can use any country in the world. It doesn't matter. And that's it. There are no more coins. All right? And those 100,000 coins were minted 400 years ago. Okay? Well, how much technology have we improved? How much have we gotten in production that makes it so that way those coins' value go way the hell up, not down, right? Because there's only the same amount of coin that there is with it. There's no inflation that was created in any way, shape, or form. And so as generations go on and the production value goes up and up and up and up and up, you're going to need less and less coins to buy. You can even make it so that way you don't even have money anymore. People just happily do stuff for what's going on. Maybe only the internet is something that people have to pay for. Why? Because it's the newest technology or whatever the deal is, and that kind of thing that's going on there. And so you have to volunteer 3-4 hours a week on helping to maintain the servers or to help you maintain the data line, whatever. Okay, think about it this way. I don't have to pay for anything. Everything I need is provided for me because of this. We all have everything that we need and that kind of stuff. In fact, we have extra, so much extra that we don't even know what to do with all of it sometimes and that kind of stuff for it. And that's fine. We have a surplus, right? And it keeps building up. And I only have to volunteer doing something to help maintain society 3 or 4 hours a week, doing something else rather than working a job for it. Maybe I have to put in 3 or 4 hours a week for snow plowing here in New England or whatever the deal is. Maybe you put in 3 or 4 hours making it so that way you go and help with the internet. Somebody else does 3 or 4 hours to make it so that way, you know, they help with the electrical stuff with it or what, all these different things that help maintain it and whatnot, but there's no money anymore. I mean, that sounds like a much better system to me for what's going on there. We don't have to pay taxes. We don't have to pay any of these other things on it. Everybody's working together for what's happening. The roads are still taken care of. We have all these new inventions that have come out that aren't being suppressed because of technology being suppressed by people who don't want it to change their dynamic for whatever's going on there. But that's not the world we live in, because everything's upside down and inverted in our world. We literally have an anti-economy right now. We have where we're doing everything the exact wrong way around for stuff. And I'm not saying the economy solves everything. I'm just using it because it's something that affects everybody, that anybody can understand on a basic level for what's going on there. You know, that's also how you can get to fixing this justice stuff. If we make it so that we are doing the right thing instead of doing the wrong thing for what it is, a lot of these problems that we've created for ourselves start going away. The animals are going to be killed less. The resources are going to be depleted less on the planet. You're not going to have this throwaway economy stuff for what's going on. I mean, imagine a toaster that's literally designed to last as long as possible for toasting your toast and whatnot. Like my grandmother had one that lasted 50 years, but her next one lasted 4 because it wasn't designed to last anywhere near as long.
Yeah, of course.
That's where a lot of these resource problems come from. And of course, we don't have a food issue on the planet. We have a resource management problem on the planet for what it is. I mean, you know, we have people that are simultaneously starving in certain pockets of the world, whereas other pockets of the world, you have people that are morbidly obese. Explain that one. It's a resource problem. That's what it is. It's not that we don't have the resources, at least in terms of food and all these other things to take care of stuff. We don't know how to do that. We could have 20 billion people on the planet. It wouldn't make any difference for what's going on there. People are like, well, how do we deal with someone who steals something? Okay, let's say I stole from you. Just to give an example. I stole your laptop, just for sake of simplicity and whatnot, right? And you can prove that I stole it because there's cameras and that kind of stuff with it. So you show that I'm stealing your laptop. You put it out there to the various different people. And if people are moral people. So I try to go and buy groceries at the grocery store. They won't let me. Till I return your laptop. I try to get gas in my car or put electricity in my car, you know, at one of the outlets that has that for electric car vehicles and whatnot. And I'm not allowed to do that until I return your laptop. And this goes on for all the different places that there are, and it starts spreading like wildfire because of the internet and all these other things. And eventually I'm shut down until I return your laptop. Where I'm coming from. Now, are they doing anything wrong? No. No, because they're refusing to interact with me. That's all they're doing. They are not putting me under derision. They're not putting me underneath duress, any of the other stuff that's going on there. They're not doing anything but saying, we will give it to you once you do the right thing and return the laptop type thing. So then, okay, I'm kind of compelled at this point, if I want to live in this society, to give you your laptop back. So I go and give you the laptop back. You go and resend the order saying, hey, their laptop's been returned and whatnot. And now I'm allowed to go get groceries, go get gas, whatever, you know, all the other stuff that's going along with it, etc. Much better system, doesn't do harm to anybody else, doesn't need police to go and do stuff with it, doesn't need the sheriffs to go and do things or what's going on with it. Makes it so that way that's the case for it. People behave better. But in order to make that happen, you have to have honor in society again, which brings up this justice notion that you're talking. So it's, you know, we have to build that back in the sense of, okay, I want to do the honorable thing. I want to do the right thing for what's going on. But that goes into teaching people how to behave properly, which goes back into the input processing and output stage, and it all goes back into all those other things that we're kind of getting back into circles again here. But the point is that, you know, I'm just going to keep hammering into it because these are the core functions of how reality is built.
Yeah.
On that front for what it is. Human beings are programmable. We're like machines. We are neither good nor evil. We are the admixture of everything that we've experienced, that we've been told, that we've been taught, that we've put into ourselves, that we've read, that we've anything in any way, shape, or form that has information into us, and how our ability is to sort and sift through that information. That's what it is. That's what determines our behavioral outcome. I mean, for anything that's malleable, obviously certain things aren't malleable. Right? I don't get to decide, you know, certain biochemistry that I have or whatever the deal is and that kind of thing. Obviously, you know, my chemicals at your age are going to be raging and whatnot in order to make it so that way I go and have sex because it's the natural next step of life that needs to be done for it. You get where I'm coming from? I don't have control over that stage of life, but I do have control over whether I allow those chemicals that dictate what I'm doing or
processing.
Yeah.
Understandable.
And, you know, I don't care whether that's for you to decide what you want to do with it. You know, you're at that stage of life and whatnot, and do what's right for you. I don't care who you're with or not with. That's none of my business, and there's nobody else's business but yours. So that's kind of what happens on this front with it too, is that, you know, there are biological influences and impulses that we have, which is fine. And some of them are great and wonderful and natural. And we suppress some because we think that we're doing the right thing while we're doing is suppressing them. But then that suppression can make it so it comes out in other negative forms and outlets as well, if it doesn't have that. So there's a lot more that can go into all these dynamics that are broken down with it. But basically what we need as a species is a science, like a science that teaches natural law, a school that teaches natural law, that teaches the principles of freedom, of how not to harm other people, of how not to do any of these other things with it. You get a generation that learns from that, say your generation or backwards, that's, you know, that kind of stuff with it. And suddenly you can see where the world changes overnight. Like like from a evolutionary standpoint, you would see where it can't, like we can't go back to it. It's not going to be possible with that. And if you get in this everywhere, not just in the United States or not just in the Western world, the whole world, and suddenly you can have an entire generation that's like, no, we're not doing this, and we understand it, and that kind of thing. That's what religion tried to teach people. Don't do these things. Okay, great, we're not doing these things. But if you don't know the why behind that, suddenly some other leader can come in or some other person can come in and say, okay, this is how we're interpreting this now. There aren't people that can be like, no, we don't do it this way. And we know we don't do it this way because of X, Y, and Z. And they just say, oh, okay, we're doing it this way now. Well, then you get religion and that kind of stuff. That's what happened with the Aztec Empire as an example.
Mm.
You had where there was a misunderstanding that came in with it that was either purposely made or somebody did it later on. I'm in the camp of purposely. That doesn't mean it's true. I'm just saying that's my particular understanding
Usually
of
it's
things
purposely.
of it and whatnot. I don't think anybody can definitively say. That's a bias I have, just to be clear on that front, regardless, to where they changed the way that they were understanding their own ritual doctrine and whatnot, and suddenly they get to where they need to sacrifice tens of thousands of people or hundreds of people and whatnot to make it so that way the sun rises the next day and blah 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 and appease it and make it so there's not eternal darkness. What? You know? But if the people were like, no, that's not what our religion says. This is bullshit. You're an insane, mad person. Then what they do is they have three options that they would deal with them in most cases. One, they would kill them because they don't want that insanity inside of their stuff like we talked about before. Two, they would exile them to some other place or whatever the deal is. And, say the British Isles did to a bunch of the people that are in Australia now. You're all a bunch of people that have done some sort of criminal activity. You're going to be sent there and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's the exile portion. Or the third one is like, okay, there's something wrong with this person. Clearly, they need help. Let's get them into the proper place to help heal them and whatnot, if they can be healed, type deal and whatnot. And so, someone that has like Alzheimer's or dementia disease, they might be behaving oddly and doing stuff that has nothing to do with reality because their brain is literally screwed up in terms of how things are with it. As a personal example, my grandfather, he read a bunch of spy novels. I mean, literally 40, 50 years or more, that's what he did. And so a lot of these plots got stuck in his head as if they were actually real and were happening to him and that kind of stuff with it. And so suddenly he's paranoid about everything. And there's people out to get him, even if they're not. But the problem is that it can have real world consequences because now he wants to have access to his gun to defend himself from people that are doing all these things with it. His perception is not true and aligned with reality, but it's not his fault. He has no control over this particular instance. This is a type of person that, okay, we need to put him in a proper place. We need to make it so that he's taken care of. That clearly, yes, he can potentially be a threat to others. He's not a threat to himself in this instance and whatnot. So we need to monitor him. But he is not doing this because he has any ill content, in any way towards anybody. But he, unfortunately, is not in track with reality. So we need to do something to help rehabilitate him if we can. In the instance of Alzheimer's, at least with the current scientific literature out there, you can't. So all we can do is try to contain that type of notion and whatnot and make it so that way we don't allow them to harm themselves or anybody else, at least to the best that we can and whatnot. It's sad, but it is the reality of stuff that's going on there too. And so, I'll finish up with this because I think we've kind of really hit the nail on the head as many times as we can from different angles. But if this line that I'm kind of indicating here represents reality, right? This line here that I'm drawing, this wavy line, represents our perception of reality. And so if it's really varied and like this, it doesn't touch that line all that often. Therefore, that person has a very skewed understanding of reality on what's actually taking place. So someone like my grandfather, when he had Alzheimer's / dementia that was doing this stuff, he would be wildly all over the place and not touch the line all that often. Every once in a while, he'd have a lucid thought that was actually a real thought that had to do with reality. But eventually, the disease took him and he died from it. Just natural, whatever. But then you have other people that say are like this, they're more touching on it. Then you have people that are, say, an expert in a particular field and they really understand their field and it's like this. And then you've got somebody who, like Buddha, let's say, a truly enlightened being is like that or whatever the deal is. And he can see reality for what it is, actually, in that particular instance. And so the more that line goes up and down and crosses reality, the more you're in alignment with reality and making it so that way you can understand things. And so that's where a lot of this also comes into, is that you have different perceptions of what reality is. And that's where people get in trouble for stuff with it. And so until we can actually figure out what reality is and actually all agree upon what reality is, it's going to be difficult in order to create some of the world that I'm talking about here without self-inflicted suffering and whatnot. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't start building towards that direction slowly but surely, but that's kind of where things are. And that's kind of how
gain knowledge
things play
now.
out. And that's how justice can be brought about as well, is aligning our thoughts and perceptions with reality as much as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Especially with anything that actually matters. You know, if you want to believe in the flying spaghetti monster, that particular belief doesn't harm anybody, right? It's delusional, but it doesn't harm anybody. Versus, I believe that I have the right to own slaves. That belief is harmful and needs to be expunged from the consciousness of every human being on the planet. And this is a numbers game. So you could have one person who knows the truth about everything, but the reality is that, well, the actuality is, because it's not reality, but the actuality is, meaning that how things are being played out, is that one person is not going to be able to change the course of human history. You're going to need to make it so that way, in terms of how the systems are built, that more people believe in whatever is truthful than don't believe, and whatever this nonsense is. And so if you have the vast majority of people believing in bullshit like we have today, we get bullshit results. That's why we have the chaos and insanity at the highest levels that they are today, because people believe things that aren't real, that have nothing to do with truth or reality in any way, shape, or form, whether they realize it or not. And, you know, I was one of those people who held on and clung on to these beliefs for a while, till I started studying these various different traditions deeply and started understanding myself better and going on my own grail quest, let's say, to really change myself. And I've had to admit to myself I was wrong thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. That goes back to your learning for justice perspective. And of course, it's a big part of it. But that's also the reason why it's there, I would say, is also because of personal responsibility. When you decide that you want to learn these things, you're also taking personal responsibility for yourself and making it so that way you can actually learn things from it, right? If you don't take the personal responsibility and say, it doesn't matter, then you're never even going to want to learn.
That's true. Yeah. I'm glad I got into all of this so young, I guess. It's one part I'm grateful for. Yeah.
I'm glad that you even have an interest at this, for this stuff and whatnot, you know, to be very beneficial for your life. I have certain things on my channel that you can check out more further. I would definitely suggest looking, it's just an audio, unfortunately. I'm going to have to remake that and maybe make a course about it. But go and look at the trivia method. Understand it. That's the one that has to do with these 3 stages of stuff that I keep harping on. So yeah, that would be my number one suggestion on that front. I think it's like 40 minutes long or something, like a little less than that. Take your time, make sure that you understand it and all that. It'll impact your life the most in terms of understanding that. When you understand that, like truly understand it, you can teach yourself practically anything. It might take a while to learn whatever the subject matter is, but you'll be able to teach yourself practically anything for what's going on. You might need to deep dive the trivia method more from other people, of course. This is just to whet your appetite, let's say.
Yeah.
But if you learn that, you'll be able to learn lots of other things for what's going on there.
I'll do that. Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, really quickly. Do you think the best state for humans in general is equilibrium, like as in neutrality? Or do you think it's positivity, as in growth? Or do you think there's growth within neutrality? Or, you know, I don't know, even as conduits for power and energies, you know, that we can be negative and positive, but we ultimately... Okay.
Stagnation leads to death. The universe abhors stagnation. You can see this in all different kinds of things where it's always looking to grow, it is always looking to try to expand and to make it so that way stagnation is anti-life. Is what it is on that particular front.
Yeah.
I don't even need to go any further onto that, at least for my point, where you need further explanation. I have no problem with explaining that with it, but it's like the idea of it, you're a robot. If you just repeat the same thing over and over again, you're not alive, you're a robot.
Yeah, I agree. It just gets confusing sometimes when, you know, justice is restoration of equilibrium, and we as, you know, creatures of growth and positivity and change, how do we kind of work around justice, you know, or does it adapt to us? if that makes sense. It's
We
just, I don't
we
know.
always have to
Yeah,
adapt to reality. Reality will never adapt to us.
Mm.
So our reality right now is that we are a species who believes in enslavement through the tyranny known as government by thinking that it has the right to do so. We have given up personal responsibility to these various different entities that make up the government and whatnot, which are all just people in one way or another. So they're always people for what's going on. So we have given up our free will choice, whether tacitly by agreeing implicitly for what's going on or by actual consent that's going on there. And we make it so that way we're all underneath duress and coercion. I mean, I'm sorry, but basically we have a bunch of gangs of psychopaths that rule the world and different pockets of it. They behave exactly like cartels do and whatnot, or other drug lords and that kind of thing that are running things with it. And it's just a gang. That's all it is. The difference is that our governments are a gang that got a hold of the education system that made it so that way people believe that they have the right to exist, they have the right to rule over them, that they have the right to do what they're doing with it. I mean, let's just take democracy as an idea for what's going on here. You have a house, you own the house. Let's say you're a little older. I don't care. I know you're not. Let's just pretend that you do for the sake, or it's your parents' house. I don't care. So you have the house, right? The house represents the land. It represents the place. It represents you and all that other stuff, right? So I come over and I say, okay, this is my house now. You feel like, no, this is not your house. Get the hell out. Anybody can see that that's wrong. This is what Putin is doing with Ukraine, right? Invading Ukraine and that kind of stuff. Nobody cares on that front. It's very blatantly obvious. His reasons for doing it might be legitimate. Maybe they're not. I'm just talking about the actual invasion in and of itself. I don't care whether that's there or not. That's not the point of the discussion. So if I come and saying it's mine and you say, no, it's not, this is ours. Okay, great. Okay, so now you say, well, we don't do that here. We have a democracy, so we have to vote for. We have to vote for things. I'm sorry. Let me go get my friends. So I go and get all my friends, and I say, okay, we all vote that I'm king and that I own this house now. Is that still legitimate? No, of course not. Yeah. Of course it's not. But that's the same game that we're playing here with it. Oh, you can't do that. You also have to make it so that way it's a legitimate vote. Well, what makes it legitimate? Well, what makes it legitimate is that you have to go through these processes and these and whatnot, and you have to get paperwork that shows that this is the case for it, and you have to do that. Okay, so you go and do that, and now you do that. Well, wait a second. That doesn't mean that you get to take away my house. Why not? I did all the paperwork, like you said. I did all these processes. My friends voted that we get to keep this house and that kind of stuff, even though it's your house. Why can't I have the house? And like you just keep playing this game over and over and showing how all the stuff that government is doing is just bullshit. It doesn't matter for what it is. Each government is the way that it is because the people have allowed it to be that way in some form or another. You think that the people in North Korea, even though they're starving to death, if all of them, every single one of them, went and told Kim that, hey, you're gonna stop this bullshit or we're gonna murder you. That's the case for it. Yeah, maybe someone will die in the process or whatever the deal is due to the military leaders getting involved or whatever the deal is. But nobody. If every single one of them, even let's say the military said, no, we're not doing this either, they're not happening. Just a lunatic. He's a ravings of a madman. Yeah. That's what the issue is that people believe in this stuff with it. And so they give up their authority. And because they give up their authority, that means there are more people that have certain power over other people and that kind of stuff, that there are rulers. And Benjamin Franklin, he's a founding father and whatnot, he ended up saying that, something along the lines of, if you seek security and you will over freedom, you will soon lose both, or something along those lines for what it is, which is true. Yeah. And so, that's what the government does. This is for your protection. It's for your protection. It's for or the children's protection, whatever the deal is.
Removes autonomy. Yeah.
Yeah. There isn't any.
There's no
It's just a gang of psychopaths that thinks that they have the right to rule over somebody else, that doesn't have the right to rule over somebody else, who thinks that by going through these weird rituals like, that are going on there, okay, I'm going to boom, boom, boom on the table here with this hammer and that kind of stuff, or the gavel that we call it. And suddenly it's been done. And this person had this person speak on their behalf that knows the secret codes and languages of the legal mumbo jumbo that we made up. And this one over here does with it. And then we bring forth all this evidence, and then that's the way that it's going to be. Or, you have the signing of the various different executive orders by the president and all this fanfare that's around, and here's the pen for this one, and here's the pen for that one, and here's the pen for this one that's here in the United States, and all the showmanship that goes. Oh, that's all it is. It's a cult. It's a cult. It's a cult. That's all that it is. It's a giant cult, man. It's a cult of some sort. That's what's happening there.
Almost
Doesn't
mock
matter
truth.
which government that it is. Now, just to be clear, there's a difference between, say, a politician and a statesman. A politician is someone who's only in there for themselves, for their own votes, whatever the deal is, that kind of stuff. They're for their own power is the point. Statesman is somebody who actually wants to do right by the people using government and that kind of thing. With which are two different things for what's happening there. You know, if you're in a place where the government is so bad that like you have to have people in government at least to like remove the corruption of government and getting people to see that there's all these problems within the government and that kind of stuff in order to get people to wake up that they need to take back some of their power and then eventually take it all back and that kind of thing with it. A statesman could be a good stopgap in the interim for what's going on there and make that happen and make it so people are like, no, and whatnot. So like if someone's like, we're getting rid of all these governmental branches, like Javier Milei in Argentina, right? I'm bringing him up because obviously he's not part of the Western world. He's his own entity. But what he's doing is he's cleaved all these employees. He's gotten rid of all these governmental agencies that are in there and whatnot that are doing nothing but stealing from their people. And Argentina is starting to slowly but surely get itself out of this hell that it's been in for, I don't know, decades, if not a century, and that kind of stuff of socialism and whatnot, and various different forms of it. And then, or feudalism even in certain regards, with the all different forms of tyranny, regardless, and making it so that way they have actual freedom. It's slowly happening, but he's doing it and he's unwinding things. And what's happening is that the people are gaining more and more of their power back for it. And hopefully they'll be like, you know what? We want as much as it is we can get back. And if everybody starts unwinding and taking back as much personal responsibility for themselves and taking their power back rather than allowing other people to do stuff with it, then yeah. I mean, what are they going to do? If everybody in the British Isles said, we are not taking another migrant, we don't care where it comes from, and they all march down, you know, to the various different areas of power of their government and whatnot. You know, they're not all in London because some of them are also in Scotland or Wales or wherever. Yep, that are going on there with it too. And they go to each one of their governmental buildings and sit there and say, we're not leaving, and neither are you until you pass a law that says no more that's going on with it. Period. End of discussion for what's happening. Or, you know, we could just kill you if you want. I mean, we don't want to do that, but we'd rather you just write words on a piece of paper. See, that's the thing. It's all it is. That's all a law is. It's words on a piece of paper or electronically stored or both somewhere. That's it. I can write words on a piece of paper. Does that make it legal? No. Somehow they have this magical right. See, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Rules for thee, but not for me. That's how you know you have tyranny.
Yeah.
And so everybody has the same rights and responsibilities as everybody else. You cannot have it any other way. Any other way goes against natural law, goes against the reality that there is in this universe, and it makes it so that way you're going to have the circle that keeps popping up, the cycles that keep popping up over and over again. People keep wondering, well, why does it keep going through the same cycles? Because we're stupid. We keep doing the same shit over and over again, expecting it to behave differently and whatnot. That's called insanity. Literally called insanity. I don't know what you want. Yeah. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't. I just know what not to do. And that's half the battle. If you get rid of all the stuff you're not supposed to do, the rest of it will work itself out eventually.
Well done. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
So we're all underneath duress. We're all underneath coercion. We're all being force-fed propaganda every day for what it is. Doesn't matter where you are on the planet. You're all corralled into certain areas that we're not allowed to leave without special permission for what's going on for it. I can't drive a car without special permission. Who gives you the right to dictate what I can do with this car as long as I'm not harming anybody? It's the whole point is like everything's a sham, everything's a lie, everything is a house of cards, and it's all ready to fall apart the moment we as a species realize, no, none of this makes any sense. Everything you're saying is insane. You're all insane. You don't have the right to rule us. We don't have the right to rule you either. And we just stop playing this game of enslavement. That's all that's happening. We have feudalism 2.0. That's what we've got going on. We've got feudalism 2.0 as the new model. That's it. That's all we've got.
More organized, more hidden.
It's much more organized, much more hidden for what's going on, much more obfuscated and that kind of stuff. And people believe in the ostensible notion of what a government is. Ostensible here means, you might not know that word, meaning what they claim their role in existence is versus what they are actually doing. They claim to protect you and to prevent chaos from happening when they're the ones that are creating the chaos. They claim to make it so that way they have your best interest at heart when they only have their own interest at heart and ruling over you for what's going on, or me or anybody else for that matter. And so that's what it means. We as a species just haven't figured out that the only thing that prevents us from having the things that we want in life and whatnot, like peace, abundance, security, all these other things, is to actually learn these principles, instill them into our youth, make it so that way the vast majority of people follow them. There will never be everybody. It's not a thing. Anybody who shows any signs of it past a certain age that can't do it, that you get rid of them, literally get rid of them. Maybe what'll happen is that as we're getting better at this stuff with it, and maybe we can go to Mars with it, we exile them to Mars. All right? That's where you go. Yeah. You want to behave that way? All you people can do whatever you want on there, and we'll send you supplies if we feel like it.
Yeah, I concur. I think that's a good idea.
You know, we're not there yet, but I'm saying, in the future, maybe that's what we do. That's our version of exile, like England did for Australia or whatever. We don't want to kill them and that kind of stuff. Personally, I think, depending upon what it is, certain people can be rehabilitated, certain people can't. And obviously, in the case of like my grandfather with Alzheimer's or dementia and that kind of stuff, that's not a rehabilitation problem. That's just them having something happen to them where they've gone insane. Those people need to be treated with respect. Yeah. Those people need to be making it so that we deal with them in a different way. We're talking about people who want to murder. They want to go around and imposing their will on people that they can't stop stealing from other people or defrauding them or whatever. That's the stuff we're talking about there. People who can't follow basic rules and whatnot and are unable to regulate themselves. A lot of these laws we have is because some idiot somewhere did something stupid that make it so it's the case with it. So because one idiot did something stupid 30 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever the case is, for each one of these things, suddenly we're all punished for it? Nah, that's not justice. That's retardedness. That's what that is. You're literally making it that way. You're slowing people down. I'm talking about the original meaning of retarded, meaning to slow down and whatnot. That's where the stagnation comes from and that kind of thing. So we are on a collision course that if we continue down the road that we are, we will go extinct, flat out, and rather rapidly. We'll have a big pyramid of enslavement, and then we'll have this area with it that'll go slowly but surely into decay, and it might take 1,000 years or whatever the deal is. This might sound like a long time, but on an evolutionary time scale, it's not really that long in terms of that, and we'll wipe ourselves out. Yes, we'll take a lot of species and cause a lot of problems along the way on this planet as things go on with it, because we're behaving like a virus. Notice I said behaving rather than it actually is a virus. So you've got that on that particular front as well.
I'm more optimistic than pessimistic. I think, even in our community on Discord, it's a start, and we're seeing proliferation now. That one person has said, no, this isn't how it's supposed to be. We've had that effect occur, and it's starting to catch on.
You familiar with the 100th or 99th monkey? I forget which one is the 100th monkey effect, 99th monkey effect?
Probably, if you tell it to me.
I'll just briefly sum it up and whatnot. So what's happening is that they found that this monkey started to wash its food in like I forget if it's a river or a lake or whatever, but started to wash its food beforehand and whatnot. And then some other monkeys saw them doing it. And then other ones started implementing it and figuring it out. And eventually it got to 100th one. And then monkeys of the same species that had never interacted with each other started doing the same thing. All right. So it's referred to as a morphogenetic field. So genetic field, genetic you get. Morpho is like, having to do with like how it plays out for stuff with it. And then there's some sort of field that connects that species on a genetic level, whatever it is, that we're going back to this consciousness that can exist outside the body idea. So suddenly, if this idea is instilled in enough people, like for human beings, let's say,
comes archetypal.
It can also organically occur on its own. So if we start teaching people how to think, if we start teaching people that there's only one law, do not steal, and all the various different permutations of that, if you start teaching all these things about how to live a lifestyle that's in balance with nature, that's natural, and that kind of stuff that's going on there, rather than the anti-economy and the anti-nature bullshit that we have going on now, then if there's enough people that learn that, suddenly more and more will start flipping on its head.
Yeah.
And humanity, for both good and for negative, is a herd species. It is a species that makes it so that way we follow groupthink, we do things that are that way with it, and we go with whatever the trends are of the prevailing group of people at that time period. And so if you have it set up in such a way that enough people start slowly building on this idea and are the early adopters of it, then eventually it starts turning on its head. I mean, look at like internet as a perfect example of that, at least in Western world. You had in the 90s where, very, very few people were part of it in any way, shape, or form. And here we are now, about 30-ish years later, and suddenly you have a 90 some odd % adoption rate throughout the Western world. And that kind of thing, 80, 90% adoption rate, sometimes even higher, depending upon the country.
Yeah.
So clearly, that started with slow stages of building up with new technology and how it was playing out. And look at all the stuff that could be done on the internet now because of all the innovation that came from that. It's the same thing that can happen here. It can happen that quickly in terms of really changing things and fixing things on this planet if there's enough momentum. Currently, we got our heads up our asses, but should we do this, then we can get out of it. Plato's cave is what this allegory is all about. His allegory is like you're looking at full fake shit. You don't understand that it's not real. It's just a shadow. It's not the actual truth of things or what it is. Someone escaped the cave, saw it, and then tried to go and free them and bring them back out. And, all the metaphor that goes into that. That's what his telling of that story is about. There's also much deeper meaning behind it in terms of like a personal journey that he went on and, something that happened to him that was a mystical experience that allowed him to understand this particular thing with it. But that's, we can still use it to showcase this is the same concept, same idea.
That's great.
So I am neither optimistic of this nor pessimistic for what's going on with it. I don't view it as a very likely scenario that we will get ourselves out of this situation due to how egotistical and hard-headed and narcissistic humanity currently is. However, as we talked about before, if suddenly there is enough courage from the populace and there's enough people that decide to start taking action on these things, then, things can rapidly change here overnight and the entire situation can change like that and make that happen with it. So to say that I think that we're doomed is also not the case for it. I'm just looking at it realistically and saying, yeah, right. If we stay on the current trajectory we're on, we're screwed.
Yeah,
can we change course? Yes. It's not baked in yet. Yes, we can. So I'll just leave it at that. The final thing I will say on all this is that a lot of people don't understand this dynamic, but it's only a few people that change the world, like significantly change it and have iron will that allow things to change for it. Examples, there was 55 people that started the Nazi party in Germany. There was 300 people that started the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. There was 56 people that signed the Declaration of Independence starting the Revolutionary War here in America. There was a handful of people that helped Joan of Arc come to get into a position of power in order to end the 100 Years' War. Technically it happened a little after her, but it was because of her results that occurred with it and became the savior of France, so to speak, during that time period. There was about 20 people studying somewhere in a pub that made it so that way they decided they wanted to end slavery inside of England. And because England was also the British Empire at that time period, began to make it so that way outward slavery, like chains and shackles and that kind of stuff that were going on with it, began to be eradicated worldwide due to its influence at the time period and whatnot. 20 people began that idea, which is, saying a lot. And the list goes on and on. So anybody who claims that a small group of dedicated people who are willing to put everything on the line in order to make that happen cannot change the world is absolutely wrong. It is the only method that has ever truly change the world.
Good to
I
know.
will leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
That was
welcome.
great.
All right.
Well-
So I'm just going to get the heck off of here. It's been 2.5
Yeah, what time
ish
is it?
hours and that kind of stuff with it. It's been great. I was
Yeah,
hoping
it's
that there
almost
would be more people that would come on. Not that I didn't enjoy talking, but it's just I wanted to get as many questions and answers out there for various different people with different perspectives of stuff
Yeah,
with
of
it.
course.
I'm grateful for you and Ryan and for Kristen for coming on. It was making that happen. And
Yeah, thank you
thank
very
you
much.
very
It was
much for
very useful.
joining.